Of yesterday's meeting in Stockton. It was a nice facility, but I'll tell you, it's nice to be home again. I'd like to introduce the board members and the staff at this time. On my far left, is John Constantino of Grass Valley. Sitting next to John is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Sitting on directly to my left is the Vice Chair, Jenny Lester Moffett of Davis. On my far right is Bob Schneider of Davis, and sitting between Bob and myself is Sandra Meraz of Alpha. My name is Carl Longley, and I come from Fresno. I'll now introduce the Executive Officer, Pamela Creedon, who will introduce her staff.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. Good morning, Board. Across the room to my left is Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and to Ken's left is Patrick Palupa, Staff Counsel for the Board. To my immediate right is Alex Mayer, Staff Counsel for the Board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, Executive Assistant for the Board and staff and me. To Karen's right is Andrew Altavote, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and to my immediate left is David Coop, you're not Assistant Executive Officer, Senior Staff Counsel for the Board. In the audience, don't make me laugh. In the audience is Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in the Reading office, and with us today is Assistant Executive Officer, retired Assistant Executive Officer Bob Crandall in the Reading office, and then there's a number of staff in the audience as well. Oh, Richard Lankarovich, I'm so sorry. I sat right in front and I still missed him. I'm so sorry, Richard. Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office.
Thank you very much. Carmen, could you lead us in the pledge, please?
Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. What I would appreciate you doing is looking those over. One of those, particularly the Thursday, 25 July, is still a draft, and we need to get your input. We'll vote on it this afternoon, but between now and this afternoon, if you could look it over so that we could get any changes made to it that need to be made, and if we can get that done, we will take it up later in the day, approval of the minutes up later in the day. We'll then move on to the meeting procedures. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request, and they're also posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens that will appear during our breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, the administrative assistant. Shaking her head positively means maybe once in my life I pronounced her name correctly. We'll move on to item 13 on the agenda, board member communications. Anybody have anything to add since yesterday?
Yes, I have. I've got my list of communications on August 6th. The marijuana. Actually, I met with staff up in Oroville for marijuana field operations with Senator Jim Nielsen and Assemblymember Logue and Butte County officials. And then again on August 7th, it was a similar group, but along with the governor's office, to talk about marijuana issues. On August 9th, I met with the Dixon RCD to go over the irrigated land program for the Sacramento Valley and what we're doing currently in my local region, and met with staff there. On August 21st, I had a tour of the Auburn wastewater treatment plant. And then on August 28th, Dr. Longley and some staff and I met with NRCS in Davis, and then also the US EPA in San Francisco for mostly a meet and greet to meet new staff that are both at NRCS and EPA, and that's it.
Carl?
What was that last date? I have it as September 3rd, but,
It could have been.
okay.
It was the Monday after Labor Day. So
Okay,
if you
yeah.
have it as September 3rd, then that sounds
September, right.
better.
Bob?
I just wanted to say I'll be stepping off the dais and out of the room for the item 24, and I've not had communications with staff on the preparation of that item.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? Of course, board members also during the communication session yesterday gave input, and as I stated then that I would be given a written report, which I will, but I was at that September 3rd meeting that Jenny just mentioned. Also, the California Bioresources Alliance had a 2-day workshop on the 18th, 19th in the state, down at the state board building, Cal EPA building, I should say. And I was, of course, on the 18th, I attended that, was a moderator for a session there. And then on the 20th, I was down in Rialto, September 20th in Rialto, for a tour of water treatment plant, the West Valley Water Treatment District's plant, a process there that Carollo Engineer is heading up, which is focused on contact biological treatment for the removal of nitrates, and in fact, that facility also has to take out perchlorate. That process will soon be online, and I plan to revisit it when it's online, but it's one of a number of processes that we're looking at. During the time period, I've also had several meetings with Mr. Phil Chandler, and he was a presenter at the state board workshop that I attended, focused on removing nitrates from groundwater, the various treatment technologies. And he is a company, INX, out of London, out of England, and they are well financed, it appears. Certainly they have a ion exchange process. Unlike other ion exchange processes, this process does not put chlorides back. The whole issue with ion exchange is when you regenerate the units, the amount of brine that you have, they supposedly can circumvent that. We will see. They're going to be doing a demo. And I think that summarizes my activities. If there's anything, it'll be on the written record. With that, any other comments?
Yes.
Yes.
I
Sandra.
attended a water tour with Carl and others on August 28th.
That's right, and we mentioned that at the 19th meeting, that we went on that water tour of disadvantaged communities. Good.
And
Thank
Carl,
Thank you, Sandra.
I'll just mention I was on the same Auburn wastewater treatment plant tour as board member Moffitt.
And one last thing for me was CV Salts on the September 26th. But everybody goes to CV Salts, don't they, Tess? And with that, anything else on this item? Good. We'll move on to item 14. Are there any attendance cards for this item? Okay, this item is for anyone wishing to speak in front of the board on any matter not having to do with today's agenda. I have a card from Alan Wade. That's fine. You got 3 minutes.
Laurent, Folsom resident. I'm here to show you this map. And what it is the Folsom sewage system done by a licensed California engineer sworn to be accurate and complete under penalty of perjury, submitted to this board. This is the north side of Folsom. Here's the 18-inch sewage pipe crossing the American River and the bridge. Here are the prisons, 3 prisons. Here's a 20-inch line that goes down to Sutter and Wool. Here is the old city. From the 19th and early 20th century, we have a 6-inch, an 8-inch, a 10-inch, and maybe another 10-inch. All 3 sewer sheds. North City, 18-inch. Prisons, 15,000 flushers, 20-inch. Old City, I don't know how many thousand people, but a 6, 8, 10, maybe another 10. Then we go down a half a mile south of that point, 1/2 mile south, is the beginning of the 27-inch line. I never knew that. I'm stunned and shocked, and you probably will be. 2 weeks I've seen this, and I'm still in disbelief. 1/2 mile south of the North City 18-inch, right at the river, and the 20-inch here, 1/2 mile further down, and the old city, 3 sewer sheds, 18, 20, 6, 8, 10, 10, goes into old pipes on the east side of Folsom Boulevard. Then, a half mile later, a 27-incher begins. It goes down a little bit, and here's this area served by a 33-inch pipe. It goes into the 27. Then it goes down a little more to, I think Sac Regional built FE3. Over at Intel, it's 42-inch pipe. At the Folsom outlets at Highway 50, it's 36-inch pipe. All of this goes into a 27-inch pipe. This is sworn, accurate, and complete under penalty of perjury. The engineer retired the day he gave it to this staff. And it was left to me to uncover this. I've got a graphic. What I've showed you from this sewer map is an 18, a 20, 6, 8, 10, 10 pipes going into the start of the 27-incher, which is a half mile south of that spaghetti. See this, the area, that kind of gap in between here? This is 19th and 20th century old Folsom, historic Folsom. All of it right down to the river. Here's the 27, which has taken a 20 and an 18 and all these others. Here's the 33, here's the 36, and it all goes into a 27. I'm still shocked. I don't understand why you left this uninvestigated. I demanded an audit, and you let them have a self-audit. I approached the engineer, and I found out why the city of Folsom mayor, way back when this was built, I found out why he excoriated and terminated my mentor, the city engineer. Now I know after all these years. I'm not asking you guys to do anything. I'm looking for a federal master. Are my 3 minutes up? Because I have more.
Your
The
3 minutes.
20-acre Folsom Corporation yard, where they take all their Vector trucks and manually pump out sewage from some of the overspilling pipes. They take it down to the 20-acre corporation yard, which has no sewage system. It goes into a tiny little pipe in Lake Natoma Shores right at the federal land. A 4-inch pipe, according to the records given me by the current Folsom engineer in charge, a 4-inch pipe, according to the flow data, a 4-inch pipe is taking 1.57 million gallons of sewage a day since 2003 until the present date. And the prison has a contract for all those 15,000. They have a contract for up to 1.5 million gallons per day. Nobody ever did any flow monitoring because, strangely enough, all the flow monitors broke. All the ones along the river broke in 2003, 10 years ago. And I
Ms.
have
Moran,
all this.
Thank you for your testimony.
You have no
We'll move on to.
You have no questions, I take it?
Are there any questions from members of the board? Thank you very much.
Bye.
We'll move on to agenda item 15, the executive officer's report. We had this item yesterday. Is there anything?
I have a staff presentation.
Okay, great. Yes, we've already, I called him, he came up.
Do you want me to catch them?
He's right here. Mr. Wade, come on. I'm sorry, I thought you were giving up your time to her, to Miss Laurent.
I was asked you if I could please follow her.
Oh, you can follow her.
Other comments.
Go ahead.
I've been coming to this board for 15 years about the subject of the city of Folsom and the inadequacy of their sewer system, the undercapacity, and the increased demands upon that system by unfettered growth, which has taken place for many years. I just have one thing I'd like to add. I was here a year ago and then again in January of this year. I read you and gave to the record, I hope it was included in the record, a report sent out in July of 2003 by a senior engineer on your staff, formerly the head of the NPDS division, Pat Leary. I hope that got in the record. I have copies of it today if it's not in the record. The point I tried to make was that nothing had changed since the time she made that report. The NPDS permit was dropped in favor of the state permit, the state general permit. We protested that. We did not want that to happen. We were told we had no standing. At any rate, I said that, all of that, last January, and the board and the staff was asked a junior staff member to stand up and commend the city of Folsom. I thought you were going to give them a gold medal for what they had done. Now we notice that your audit gave them a clean bill of health. However, and Lori Laurent just alluded to this, on July 8th, 2013, the City Council of Folsom received a report from an engineer, an engineering concern, indicating that the meters, the very meters on which some of your positive audit depended, were deeply flawed and have to be replaced to the tune of $149,000 with a budgeted amount of $400,000 in case more is needed. Further information, as Ms. Laurent said, indicated that those meters, in fact, had all miraculously stopped working in 2003 before this board, the predecessor board, decided to remove them from the NPDES permit. I have copies of the City Council action, which I would like to give to appropriate people. I don't know why the staff and board feels that they have to continue to run interference for Folsom. They are clearly way off base unless you can show us that we are, and I don't think we are. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Carl,
Yes.
I don't think we need it today, but if we could just get some response for staff on this, if this is new information about what's going on with it. Thank you.
What's going on is nothing that hasn't been going on for many years.
We will ask the executive officer to provide that to us possibly at the next meeting. We're ready now for the executive officer's report.
Well, this is time for me to provide a sustained superior accomplishment award to our staff for their outstanding work. And this one today will go to Brian Smith. He's a supervising water resources control engineer in our Reading office. Hi, Brian is a supervisor in the Reading office, and he joined the board in 2000 and was promoted to senior in the Reading's North Regulatory Unit in 2005. Due to an untimely vacancy, Brian was asked to also manage the Reading South Regulatory Unit again in March 2007, which he held until the position was filled in 2008. During this period, Brian quickly gained an office-wide reputation as a knowledgeable, thoughtful, and highly respected leader, steering many controversial case scenarios and permits to completion. In 2009, when Jim Pedry, our former AEO prior to Bob Crandall, had retired, Brian again stepped up to the plate and served as a point of consistency and direction until the new AEO, Robert Crandall, was hired in 2010. At that time, Brian worked diligently to make sure Mr. Crandall was apprised of the Water Board's administrative processes and the many controversial issues involving the Reading office cases. Brian was then promoted to his current supervising position in 2011, January 2011. As the only supervising engineer in Reading office, Brian's responsibilities include a myriad of tasks. Throughout 2011, Brian experienced what anyone would consider a significant learning curve. Not only was he entrenched in adjusting to his new role, but also becoming familiar with two new programs as the Central Valley Water Board Stormwater Program and Water Quality Search Program Manager. All of this in addition to his continuation of informal role as Senior WRCE of the North Unit due to an inability to immediately backfill his position. In December 2012, when Mr. Crandall retired, and in February 2013, Clint Snyder was promoted to the AEO in Reading. Again, Brian was instrumental in getting the new AEO up to speed on the key issues and administrative processes. As the new AEO, Mr. Snyder values his judgment and appreciates his willingness to accept any new responsibility assigned to him. Throughout all of his time in the Reading office, Brian has maintained the highest level of professionalism and dedication. His dedication has made a huge difference in the stability of the office during all these transitions. Staff values his opinion and regularly look to him for guidance, as do I, and his contribution to the Reading office and our board cannot be overstated at all. So with that, and also the unfortunate passing of Greg Cash in our Reading office, Brian has also served as a great support to staff during this difficult time for them up there. So for that, I want to recognize Brian. Yeah, we know, because I'm short. Congratulations. That's probably not terrible. All right. No, don't.
Back together again. Whoops, everything's going apart.
So unless there are any other questions, Dr. Longley?
Are there any questions by members of the board regarding the executive officer's report?
It's,
If not, then we'll put things together here, and I've got to get my monitor back on. You know how to do that. That's all right. at the break, we'll get it going again. Um,
Dr. Longley,
yes.
Tam Doduk just arrived to the board meeting.
As Pamela just mentioned, our liaison, the state board, individual I've had very strong relationship with over the years, Tam Duduk, has joined us, state board member. Where are you, Tam? There you are. Tam was also with us yesterday when she finally got her car working. Particularly for the dairy hearing in Sacramento. I'll tell you what, let's just take about 2 minutes here while we figure out what's going on. Yes, please. Thank you. I know I'm fine. Thanks a lot, folks. I'm sorry. I apologize for the downtime we had here. Next item. Next item on the agenda is item 16. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested items 25 through 29. Are there any late changes? Ken, are there any late changes on the item 16?
I am very sorry. Was working on another agenda item and some logistical issues. Which is item 16?
The uncontested, the
Uncontested calendar. There are no late revisions.
I must say that in how many years have I been on this board? This is the first time I have ever seen Ken caught like that. In how many years?
Second time, but
Okay.
it was a long time ago.
This is the gentleman who is always prepared.
I apologize for distracting the AE with another technical issue.
Well, that's a reason.
And if we're lucky, you will not know why I was distracted. But
Okay. There are no late revisions of these items. Do I have first of all, I'll close the hearing. Do I have a motion? Yes. John has moved. Do I have a second? Second. Jenny seconded. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Costantino? Mr. Schneider? Ms. Ramirez? Yes. Ms. Miraz? Yes. Ms. Moffett?
Aye.
Dr. Longley?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 17. At this time, we will receive an informational report on the regulation and enforcement of marijuana growing operations in California. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following the presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Clint Snyder. I'm an Assistant Executive Officer. I manage the Central Valley Water Board's Reading office. The purpose of this informational item is to inform you of recent staff involvement regarding the potential regulation and enforcement of marijuana cultivators within the Central Valley region.
Clint, could you please move closer to the microphone?
You're at the, could be your height.
Presenting with me today are Patrick Palupa, Staff Counsel, the State Water Board's Office of Chief Counsel, Chris Kerrigan, Director of the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement, Lieutenant Dwayne Little, Supervising Warden with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Brant Henderson, a biologist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. In the audience and available to answer questions following the presentation are Storm Filer, environmental scientist with the North Coast Water Board, extensive work on this subject with the North Coast region. Brian Schmid, who's with Formation Environmental, whom I've asked to prepare a scope of work and cost estimate to quantify the number of marijuana grows within the state of California. And finally, Andrew Merkel, who is president of the Western Plant Science Association, a marijuana industry representative. Vice Chair Jennifer Moffitt and Board Member Bob Schneider serve as the Central Valley Water Board Subcommittee on this topic and have participated in many of the conversations being discussed today. I'll begin this presentation by providing some background as to how we became involved in the marijuana issues before you today. Mr. Palupa will provide an overview of the Compassionate Use Act, recent memos, and some potential preliminary options the board may want to consider in the regulation of marijuana industry. Lieutenant Little and Mr. Henderson will describe a typical encounter with marijuana cultivators, provide photographs illustrating the environmental damage that can be caused by such operations, and further describe their experience inspecting these facilities. Mr. Kerrigan will then describe potential enforcement options and the Office of Enforcement's experience working with North Coast Water Board staff on the subject. Finally, I'll end this presentation with a brief description of staff's preliminary strategy and proposed next steps. On May 7, Chairman Bill Connolly, the Butte County Board of Supervisors, wrote the Central Valley Water Board requesting assistance to enforce the Clean Water Act and requested an explanation of the Central Valley Water Board's position to not fully regulate the state construction stormwater permit regulations on construction sites that disturb over 1 acre of soil, or the state's industrial stormwater permit regulations for ongoing marijuana operations in Butte County. On May 28th, staff responded to Mr. Connolly in writing. We cited the difficulty in determining a legal Proposition 215 grow versus an illegal one, the inherent dangers associated with grow operations, and the fact that our staff are not trained peace officers and as such do not have the requisite training to deal with the myriad of potential issues associated with these operations. Staff did, however, offer in-house technical expertise to those inspecting such facilities. On July 19, Ms. Creedon received a letter from Assemblyman Dan Logue on behalf of Butte County Board of Supervisors. Mr. Logue represents Tehama, Butte, Colusa, Sutter, and Yuba counties. Mr. Logue reiterated the importance of the Water Board involvement in marijuana operations and likened these facilities to those in the farming and timber communities. On August 6th, Water Board staff and the Central Valley Water Board's Vice Chair, Jennifer Moffitt, met in Butte County with Assemblyman Logue, Senator Nielsen, and Butte County representatives. This meeting was arranged by Mr. Logue to discuss the Central Valley Water Board's position regarding staff's active participation in marijuana enforcement activities. The following day, on August 7th, the Water Board staff met at the state capitol with Assemblyman Logue, Butte County representatives, and the governor's office. The purpose of this meeting was to elevate the county's concerns regarding the Central Valley Water Board's position. It was determined through this meeting that while Butte County does have legitimate concerns, further discussion was warranted before Central Valley Water Board staff would participate in marijuana enforcement. On August 22nd, Water Board staff developed a strategic plan outline for the regulation and enforcement of marijuana cultivators. I'll be discussing this plan later in the presentation. On August 27th, Water Board staff received a letter from Shasta County Board of Supervisors, and this letter echoed the same sentiment of Butte counties. On September 4th, Water Board staff again met at the state capitol for the first formal statewide task force meeting. Those present included the governor's office, Assemblyman Logue, Assemblyman Wesley Chesbro, who represents the North Coast region, Water Board staff, CAL FIRE, and Fish and Wildlife. Local law enforcement officials were also present, including Sheriff Tom Basinko, who represents Shasta County. The purpose of this meeting was to reiterate the goals of the statewide task force and further develop a list of key participants. 3 important considerations have developed from these meetings. Media coverage has been heavy. A local working group has been established, and a statewide task force has been established. So Patrick Palupa is going to discuss briefly the regulatory overview of the marijuana issues before you today. We'll follow Patrick's presentation by CAL FIRE, and then Chris Kerrigan will give a discussion on the enforcement options.
Hello, board members. My name is Patrick Palupa, attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel. I'm going to go into some of the regulatory issues that we're approaching in this brave new world of marijuana regulation that we're seeing in California. I think the baseline of my presentation today is that the board can address the waste discharges associated with marijuana growing operations, and also to point out that the law is very murky, which affects in terms of the criminality of these activities. We've got state and federal laws that are going in very, very different directions. The state law that's most on point here, and the reason why a lot of these cultivators are growing with, at least ostensibly under the cover of law, was the Compassionate Use Act of 1996, otherwise known as Proposition 215. It added sections to the Health and Safety Code and basically said that seriously ill patients have the right to obtain and use marijuana in the state of California. It generally left seriously ill undefined, and seriously ill has been interpreted to include a broad range of medical ailments. So as long as you have a note from a physician or somebody acting under a physician, you can use and cultivate marijuana in this state. It limits the state prosecutions of medicinal marijuana users and their caregivers, but importantly here, it does not affect federal law respecting the criminality of marijuana. It also does not supersede laws that prohibit engaging in conduct that endangers others, prohibits diversion for non-medical uses as well. I'll also add that the national trend is towards greater legalization. We had a measure that passed under the Schwarzenegger administration that reduced the criminal penalties for certain possession of marijuana. We also have Washington, the state of Washington, and Colorado, which have ventured into uncharted territory in the blanket legalization of these substances. So that's what's happening at the state level. On the federal level, on the other hand, we still have the Controlled Substances Act, which bars marijuana production for any purpose. The DEA, the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Department of Health and Human Services consider cannabis to have unproven abuse potential and toxicity, and therefore they have determined that cannabis merits Schedule I treatment. Schedule I under the Controlled Substances Act is the most dangerous category of substances. It's with no currently accepted medical use. So you can see the kind of divergent views of the states and the feds here. There's also the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which has repeatedly been cited by the U.S. Department of Justice, which is an international treaty that prohibits production and supply of specific drugs, including marijuana. You know, kind of laying this foundation here, I'm not saying that the board here can't address the waste discharges from these operations, just that I think that we're not going to have the federal help that we usually have in venturing into these type of regulatory operations. A few things need to change at the federal level before they start viewing this through a different lens.
Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to go into this, but from a federal water quality point of view, that why wouldn't there be an issue with federal help on water quality issues as opposed to?
With respect to getting into the water quality issues, I think you've got a couple different things going on. Certainly, they'll take a look at the pollutants flowing into the federal waterways, but in terms of kind of US EPA developing standards for marijuana cultivation, or even venturing into opining about how these activities are going to be conducted, U.S. Department of Agriculture has a large program that provides guidance to farmers and other folks who are engaging in similar operations with legal substances. You're just not going to see that type of project being developed at the federal level anytime soon, at least as far as my opinion goes. All right, so there is, however, we just had, and this was actually came out just before one of our discussions on at the Capitol. In September, the U.S. Department of Justice issued a guidance memo basically softening their stance on marijuana prosecutions in states where it is legal for some purposes. That includes California. The memo actually came out specifically to address Colorado and Washington, but California also has medical use laws on the books, and they issued a prosecutorial guidance memo. It basically outlines that they still will prosecute cases to prevent the distribution of marijuana by criminal enterprises, gangs, and cartels. They will still attempt to prevent the diversion of marijuana to states where it remains illegal for all purposes, prevent violence and the use of firearms in the cultivation and distribution of marijuana, prevent the growing of marijuana on public lands, which is always illegal, even under California law, and the public safety and environmental dangers posed by marijuana production on public lands. They also talked a little bit about the drug driving and exacerbation of public health concerns and distribution to minors. This is something that they're still going to be active in, but in terms of prosecuting quote-unquote legal grows, that's something that the Department of Justice has said that they will step back a little bit from. All right. Just because it has come up in a lot of the press surrounding this issue, I'm going to talk a little bit about Clean Water Act enforcement versus water code enforcement. Our mission here, as you know, is to preserve and enhance the quality of California's water resources for the benefit of present and future generations. And we do this using authority granted by the Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act. Some of these provisions authorize us to enforce the Federal Clean Water Act. Now, while the Porter Cologne Act grants the board a number of options to address water quality impacts associated with marijuana cultivators, it is important to clarify that the Clean Water Act related provisions of Porter Cologne aren't necessarily the most effective tools for addressing these impacts, and it's for the reasons that you see on the slide. The Federal Clean Water Act is very effective at regulating discharges to navigable waters from discernible, confined, and discrete conveyances. That's the point sources. However, the Clean Water Act excludes most agricultural sources and doesn't address groundwater. This is all to say that evident experience has shown that other provisions of Porter Cologne, such as those that grant the board the authority to compel individuals to remedy threatened impacts to groundwater and or surface waters, often provide a more effective and proactive tools to enforce Clean Water Act laws and clean water laws in California. And here again, I think that in guiding this discussion, it's important to note that we're really dealing with not just one type of marijuana cultivator. Generally speaking, I've identified, and this is very much in flux here, but 3 types of cultivators. We've got those that are affiliated with criminal organizations. Those are the ones that I think present a grave risk to board staff going onto the site. We also have a lot of those that are really affecting water quality that might not be the Mexican cartel style cultivators, those out to make a quick buck. I think you'll hear some from the counties, folks who basically have no interest in preserving a ongoing relationship with the state. They sometimes come in from out of state, grow on state lands, cut cut their crop and leave. I've heard comment from the California District Attorneys Association that some of these folks don't even know that it rains in California. I mean, they literally are just up here during the dry season, and then they're gone to other points in the country to sell their product when they're out of it. And, you know, open up a cultivation site on a new location the next year. I think these folks present a very grave threat to water quality, but we might address these differently from other cultivators. And then we've got the quasi-legitimate cultivators, and I use quasi because under state law it might be legal, under federal law it's still illegal. And those are the folks that, you know, we may want to venture into a regulatory program to govern those actions. I think that's some options that the North Coast Board is pursuing right now. I think you can ask, we've got some staff from the North Coast here about how they're trying to address those concerns. But I do want to point out in the context of this discussion that the board is not the appropriate agency to determine whether a grower is in compliance with state medicinal marijuana laws. That is much, much beyond our investigators' expertise. I wouldn't want to wade into that type of categorization effort for a number of reasons. And so I think what we're going to talk about next is what can the board do? You've heard from me that it is still highly illegal under federal law to cultivate marijuana, but I think that it's important to note that the board can venture into the regulation of the waste discharges from these operations. It's just a separate issue from authorizing the cultivation of marijuana, and I think that's a very important distinction to maintain. At the Office of Chief Counsel, we've been approaching this issue with a great deal of delicacy because it is an issue that, again, it remains highly illegal under federal law, so we want to be very careful with what we do. However, we've concluded that the regional boards can regulate the discharges of waste from cannabis cultivators without impermissibly preempting federal criminal law. In other words, activities associated with marijuana cultivation cannot bypass and escape all other general laws, such as water quality laws, just because the activity is considered illegal under federal law. That would create a perverse incentive that would itself encourage noncompliance with federal law. We don't want to exempt them just because they're operating something that the federal law considers illicit. This is analogous to, there's a couple cases out there, the County of San Diego versus San Diego Normal, which ruled that the County of San Diego can issue ID cards to medicinal marijuana patients without impermissibly preempting the federal law. Also, a Bureau of Equalization has gone to tax some of these dispensary operations. That, again, is a regulation that isn't authorizing the cultivation and sale of marijuana. It's just dealing with some of the regulatory aspects of general laws of applicability.
Patrick, what bureau was that?
Board of Equalization, sorry. I think that the one caveat we've got to keep in the back of our minds is that anything that we do cannot explicitly authorize the cultivation of marijuana. We would be impermissibly in conflict with federal law if we go into that direction. And so our current regulatory toolbox is somewhat limited. We've got grading violations, we've got some stormwater issues, but they're really reactive. You know, you already have the site graded and you already have the stormwater violations occurring, and sometimes these folks have turned tail and ran by the time we can address the water quality impacts. So we're really talking about exploring new regulatory tools in this discussion here. And these are some of the options that we may use to regulate these discharges. We have basin plan amendments in place currently that prohibit waste discharges associated with specific activities. We could go in the direction of adopting a basin plan amendment to prohibit waste discharges from cannabis cultivators or conditionally prohibit these discharges. We could go into a general order or a general waiver for these type of activities, or go into individual permits. It's certainly something that we could do as well. We could also regulate these activities under the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Funny as it may seem, the option could be on the table for a cannabis coalition, a regulatory approach, that I think a few years ago we thought was completely out of the ballpark. We would not be considering that. I think with the trends and the water quality impacts that we're seeing, that might be a reasonable direction to go in. We have completed the CEQA work for the Irrigated Lands Programmatic EIR, and many of the water quality concerns associated with cannabis cultivation are addressed in that EIR. So it would not be unheard of to venture into that direction. I think that there'd be a lot of coordination, and we wouldn't be involved in that tomorrow, but that may be a direction that we pursue. And lastly, I think education efforts also is something that we might want to consider, spending a little bit of our resources to get information out there about appropriate growing techniques and to put some guidance memorandums up there. Again, I think that's a direction that the North Coast is currently going in. And that pretty much concludes my portion. I think I don't really have a lot of answers for you right now, just some questions to ponder.
A couple questions I have, Patrick, is first, Colorado and Washington, are they addressing cleanup issues?
They are addressing cleanup issues in a variety of different ways, and I can expound on that, with the memo to you. These states, Colorado has I think they're calling it a Proposition 64 task force that the governor's office put together in Colorado. They are regulating it similar to alcohol, and they're also asking their environmental agencies to review kind of the plans. Washington is similarly venturing into that direction. I think they have draft recommendations in the state of Washington up. So again, they're still trying to figure out which departments fit into it and which they're going to corral to regulate these activities. I think they're falling on the side of regulating it very similar to existing agricultural operations, and the distribution point is regulated similar to alcohol. This is how they're approaching it.
Thank you. And the other comment really is, I find very interesting the concept of a cannabis coalition, particularly when you talk about the need for education. And a coalition could be a very effective means of addressing that education issue, which is critical if we're going to get folks who grow cannabis to have best management practices.
I agree, and I think one of the issues why it's worthwhile exploring is, as I've mentioned, you've heard from some folks in the agricultural community that they don't want to submit their information directly to the board. I think the folks involved in growing cannabis definitely do not want to submit their personal information to the board, though that may be the direction that we ultimately go in. And that's for obvious reasons. The feds can certainly subpoena us and get all that grower information, and that's still illegal under federal law. So we'd be providing that to the federal agencies. So it's something that I think if it was completely legal at the federal and state level, we would probably be regulating them under the Irrigated Lands Program. But it's not, so we have that added wrinkle. But our focus is on water quality, and we're going to figure out a way to take care of those water quality issues one way or another.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Yes,
Yeah,
John?
Carl. Two questions. One, the first one is the idea that when you spoke of not authorizing the sale, if we were to regulate, has it been vetted that doesn't provide some sort of inverted authorization?
I think that's something we're looking into. I think it's an area that we're treading lightly, but I do think that our focus of all of our regulations, whether it's regular agriculture or whether it's a PUTW, is really focusing on the waste discharges. And as long as we don't explicitly authorize what's going on in the facility, we can go ahead and regulate those activities. I mean, we have had instances where the plants that we've been regulating, sometimes an industrial plant has had some criminal activity going on, and our permit is just one aspect of their business operation. Recently there was the Campbell's tomato fraud case that you may have heard of. The board had regulations on that facility, did inspections on that facility, and through the bankruptcy proceeding transferred that permit to the new owners, and the old owners are, I think some of them are in jail still. So it's one of those things where we don't go into these facilities and determine whether they're OSHA compliant. We don't go into these facilities and determine whether they're following all the laws that under the sun. We really just focus on the waste discharges, and I think that's kind of the model that we have to look at when we're going into this new territory of regulation of these activities.
And then the last question for now is, I think Clint said something about a contractor for statewide, and then when you talk about a governor's task force, it sounds statewide, but this is regional, and so.
Yeah, I mean, our discussions with the governor's office, I think they're taking a hard look at this too, and I think they're still trying to figure out how this is going to be coordinated at the state level, whether they're going to be highly involved or not. I think the state water board certainly can go ahead and try and coordinate the efforts of the regional water boards, and I think that effort is gradually coalescing. I mean, this is a water quality issue that has been festering for some time. We certainly are, if we close our eyes, it will not go away. It's not going away anytime soon, as I think you're going to hear some testimony that the problem's actually growing quite a bit. So I think some degree of statewide coordination is involved. I think in terms of the political entities involved at the Capitol, they are very much weighing their options in terms of how they want to come out on this issue.
And did I hear right, was it a statewide survey, Clint, of marijuana grown?
Statewide survey, as far as the scope of work and cost estimate?
Yes.
That's something we've done individually through the regional water board as part of our strategy at the statewide task force. And so I've asked Brian Schmid, Formation Environmental, to put together a scope of work and cost estimate to try to quantify the number of marijuana grows within the state of California, particularly the Central Valley region. But to this point in time, no one has a solid figure as to how many grows are out there. You hear figures like tens of thousands, but there are no numbers. And so the purpose of that was to try to get at and quantify the number of grows.
With that said, I think it's important that our efforts be closely coordinated with the other regional boards and certainly with the staff, with the state board. I had a brief discussion yesterday with Tam Dudek regarding this. I think it is going to be a continuing matter of discussion. Certainly you're talking statewide with the folks that you're talking to, Patrick, but I think it's important that we have a coordinated effort, whatever that looks like in the end.
Absolutely.
Any further comments or questions?
Dr. Longley, we're not done with the presentation.
Oh, I know, but
Okay,
for
okay.
Patrick. No, I had.
All right.
I'm
With
not
that, let me
quite that
introduce.
fast. Okay. Next, then, we have Lieutenant Dwayne Little.
Yeah, let me introduce Lieutenant Dwayne Little and Brad Henderson. Lieutenant Little is a field supervisor for the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Shasta and Tehama County. He attended Humboldt State University and majored in fisheries biology with a minor in water quality biology. Prior to becoming Fish and Wildlife Warden, he ran CDFW's Region 1 Water Quality Lab in Redding. During the last 5 years of his 32-year career with the department, he has focused extensively on issues associated with marijuana grows and has investigated environmental issues in over 300 illegal marijuana cultivation sites. Brad Henderson is a senior environmental scientist working in the Lake and Streambed Alteration Program of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. He specializes in planning and regulatory programs and their interrelationships with the biological resources of the North State. For the past year, he has been working on the issue of marijuana cultivation and learning how the green rush is affecting Northern California. So these folks are highly experienced, and I encourage you to ask as many questions of them as they can field.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My career started, as already mentioned, 32 years ago, and I'm very passionate about what I do. And over the last 5 years, I've seen a progression of environmental damage that I haven't seen for the last 23 to 28 years that I've been in Shasta and Tehama County. The grading issues are extensive. The local law enforcement, the county, we can't keep up with it. We're overwhelmed. And when I was asked to give this presentation initially, I knew that Brad Henderson was well-versed in already put together programs. So really my initial is just kind of give you an overview about my law enforcement experience with the county and the North State, and then to defer it back to Brad to give the initial presentation, then I'll answer any questions you have. But basically, we saw the cultivation of marijuana, start 15, 20 years ago, or it was probably going on far before that, in the national forest, up in the foothills, in a clandestine point of view. The Mexican cartel, for the most part, was the main perpetrators. They would secrete themselves in our national forests, divert flows, use pesticides, use high levels of fertilizer, and so forth, leave copious amounts of litter in our national forests. And then all of a sudden, in the last 5 years or so, 3 to 5 years, the cartel, the Mexican cartel, the Asian cartels, the folks, the entrepreneurs from out of the state, they have migrated to north central California, and they've shown up in mass. They are in our backyards. They're in our rural areas, our oak woodlands. They are doing this on not the large scale that you see on the North Coast, where tens of acres are denuded. They do it in small half-acre parcels, quarter-acre parcels. And where I became really alarmed was the fact that this was done on such a wide scale that we probably have thousands of grows in Shasta County alone, let alone probably thousands of grows in Tehama County. And I became extremely alarmed with the cumulative impact that's going on. Initially, on its face, the biggest concern I have is erosion sediment issues in our anadromous, or threatened and listed waterways for anadromous fisheries, and then on top of that, the threat to our community, our culture, our lifestyle, and so forth. We have no clue as to yet what the cumulative impact, or probably won't have an idea for years down the road about the pesticides and fertilizers. But initially, I work closely with the counties. I try my best to facilitate their involvement. I provide security for them with myself or my counterparts to help investigate and research these issues, and I provide as much information as I can to help them do their job. Again, they're overwhelmed. I strongly believe that this process, especially in our area, starts with the county, because most of the time it doesn't meet the threshold of the regional board. And so, but the county again is overwhelmed. They're on the fence about how far they should take it. They usually look towards other counties that have won case law and set a precedence for how far they can take it. With that in mind, it's something that's already touched on, where I feel is the biggest tool we have in our toolbox to get on top of this is education. And if the board can help us in any way whatsoever, work collaboratively with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the county agencies and so forth, is to help promote the educational aspect, to find some way without legitimizing the activity, but at the same time allow for the responsible growth of those people responsible use of those people needing to grow marijuana for medicinal purposes, and to crack down on those people trying to profit and destroy our natural resources. If you have any questions after Mr. Henderson's presentation, I'll be more than glad to answer those.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be doing this. So let's just start out really quickly with some quick terms. You've already had a great introduction to this issue. Cannabis sativa is a scientific name for the plant we're talking about. Marijuana is a term that can have some baggage maybe, but it's cannabis. It's grown specifically for its THC content. Hemp, on the other hand, is cannabis with low THC. You've already heard the term grow. I looked it up in the dictionary. It says it's a verb. In this context, it's a noun. It's a farm, it's a garden, whatever you want to call it. 215 grows. They claim to be growing, producing medical marijuana. Cartel grow is sort of a general term, some link to a drug trafficking organization. And you also sometimes hear the word trespass grow. These are usually on public land. These boundaries are all sort of fuzzy. And so you don't always know what you're looking at when you go to a site. And for this presentation, I'm just going to use the scientific term cannabis for this product. Let's talk about impacts. That's really the focus of what this talk is going to be on. We have land and water impacts, and there really are two main kinds of impacts, I think. I think one is what I've been calling development impacts. Those are impacts that are associated with developing a new site. Most of these grows take place on lands that are undeveloped. They're natural lands, natural vegetation. We also have the operational impacts that come along with the farming practices. So what do we compare this to? Well, it's been compared to the gold rush. It's been compared to the housing bubble. We have lots of brand new disturbances on the landscape, especially where I work in Shasta and Tehama counties, a little bit in Trinity County. We can look at an area, you can do this all over the place. This is just a rural community, dispersed housing, not a lot going on in 2009. In 2010, there's been a change. 4 grows. 2011, something's changed, it's doubled. You can go to Post Mountain in Trinity County, look at an aerial from 2005, and look at an aerial from 2012. There is a lot of change happening on the landscape. New developments. What do we see in these developments? Well, we see lots of grading and road construction. When we ask, much of it is unpermitted. We see lots of unpermitted vegetation removal that's associated with the grading and road construction. Almost never see best management practices. We have development going right into streams and riparian areas. We don't see setbacks. As a result, habitats are being fragmented. We see immediate erosion and sedimentation, and those issues, the erosion, sedimentation, continue as sort of an operational impact as well. So this grading, people don't want to put the grows where they're visible. They go to the woods, to the backcountry, and they plow new roads. And you get all kinds of things happening. This is a steep slope. They needed to create a pad for the plants. They pushed the soil down into the stream. We have some help, a lot of help actually, from CAL FIRE, who get involved as a result of unpermitted timber conversion. You can see these folks that created this grow didn't know a whole lot about felling trees. It's a good thing they didn't kill themselves. We see a lot of that. We see a lot of people coming in from out of state, out of the country. They're probably not farmers in the first place. They're following how-to guidebooks and doing all kinds of things, a lot of which don't work. You see a lot of grows that fail. This is happening high elevations, low elevations, pretty much everywhere. Here's an oak woodland that was taken out. You can see the dye from the herbicide that was placed on the trunk of the oak. In this case, this was actually a trespass grows on public land, and you can see they didn't take all the vegetation down because then you'd be very easily seen from the air. So you get partial removal of oak woodland. Here's a private parcel where they took a lot more of it out. No best management practices. Here's a shot down at a riparian area, an access road, a water tank, and right below is a stream. Here's an ephemeral stream in oak woodland in Shasta County. And just some more the same thing. Seeing this all over. Habitat fragmentation, obviously, you start chopping up the vegetation cover. You start seeing, more and more of edge effects. Invasive weeds and things can enter natural habitats. In a situation like this, that's a significant portion of what was there just a few years ago. This is the same shot from Post Mountain in Trinity County. Erosion and sedimentation, again, it happens right away and then it continues. Ends up in the streams. So let's talk a little about operational impacts. One of the biggest ones I think is just the water use, stream diversions, which result in streams with lower flow, even drying up in some cases, even fish kills in some cases. Some of these sites use a lot of chemicals, pesticides and fertilizers. Others are organic. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. We have some wildlife poisonings. You may be aware there's been quite a bit of discussion lately about the anticoagulants, the rodenticides that are getting into the food chain and killing off top predators. It's been documented that that's happening. It's been an issue for many, many years in the urban wildland interface, but now we're finding animals with rodenticides in the backcountry, far, far from any human habitation. So that those materials are getting out and getting into the wildlife. We also have poaching, which I don't have listed here, but that's kind of an ongoing impact. A lot of grows will, you'll find evidence that there's been poaching. Lots of trash, latrines on most of these sites, usually not illegal residents on many of these sites, and the ongoing soil and water pollution I talked about. A couple stream diversions. If you're lucky enough to be near a stream, you can dam the stream. You can line it, you can create a pond, you can have a gravity feed distribution system for water, you can have a pump. Basically, any way to get water to the plants, somebody's already thought of it. Sometimes it'd be very convenient, they're close by. Other times, there's no water anywhere nearby, you can use water trucks, that's been mentioned already. We've seen folks filling containers from the streams, loading the containers into the back of a pickup, taking those up to the grows. We do see wells. We also hear many of them are unpermitted. We find out about this in many cases from downstream water rights holders who are just frustrated. This was a domestic water right on a stream in Shasta County near Mountain, and these folks lost their water. When we looked into it, we found about 5 or 6 grows upstream that were drafting. So cannabis does need quite a bit of water. We've been looking at figures from the industry really that talk about that. About a 150-day watering period. There's a curve, early in the season the plants don't need as much water. As it heats up and the plants get bigger, they need more and more. But we've seen estimates of up to 15 gallons per day. It may be higher than that even. A lot of the industry figures come from cool coastal areas in the interior. It gets a lot hotter. There's a lot more evapotranspiration. It could be a phenomenally high number. I just don't know. And, again, you see everything from little tiny pumps to water trucks to whatever it takes. So here's an estimate. This is out of Humboldt County from an industry group. They're estimating 6 gallons per plant per day. You can do the math and figure out how many gallons of water you're using. Here's another. It's kind of hard to see, but the bottom box at the bottom of the slide there, that estimate says when the temperatures are into the 80s and higher, we're talking about 15 gallons per plant per day. Significant amount of water. And so let's get on to fertilizers and pest control agents. Surprisingly, a lot of these operations really are quote-unquote organic. You find, the non-salt, less soluble, lower concentration products on these sites. So you get to go and if you're a fan of American Pickers or Garbologist, there's plenty of interesting things to look at in terms of spent containers and empty bags and sometimes full containers and full bags. But there's definitely some incentive out there. Some growers are using these products that are less polluting. We also find lots of traditional products, salt-based fertilizers and rodenticides and Pretty much everything. We see a lot of home products that really aren't ag products. They're home insecticides that get brought out into the field and used. And every once in a while, we come across the pink stuff, Furadan or something related to it, which is illegal to possess and incredibly toxic. And just a reminder, pesticides are registered for use on specific crops. There are no pesticides registered for cannabis, especially cannabis intended for human consumption. I mentioned this a bit before. The killing agents, rodenticides get into the food chain, will concentrate and will affect predators. This past year, a lot of emphasis has been placed on fishers. We think it probably gets into other predators as well. We have our latrines, everything from the rustic to the fancy. These sites are rural sites. They're often private land. There's no structure, no residence. You'll see all kinds of setups. No place to put the garbage, so it just goes wherever. Here it's in the stream. If you're lucky, you have a trailer to live in. You can discharge your tank wherever you want. It's a common thing that we see. Here's some potting soil. Perlite is the white stuff in the soil. It's what you find when you buy a plant from the nursery. Helps to hold on to the water. This was dumped into the stream. I was at the beach, Humboldt Bay, not too long ago, and found perlite on the shore, and so I know it's moving. And I'm clicking and nothing's happening. Why is that? There it is. Thank you. And human health and safety implications, there's many. So let's talk about a couple case studies of 215 grows. I know some probably are fairly clean and green, but most aren't that I've seen. They tend to look something like this. And this was an interesting site for me because it was an organic site. All the plant products were organic. Every picture here from that site was taken from that site, and I've never seen so many gas cans in one place, hardly ever, and barrels of diesel fuel or something, but lots of hydrocarbons. So it's kind of a weird juxtaposition of high-end designer organic plant amendments, on the other hand, all this other pollution and land disturbance going on. This one even had a portable swamp cooler to keep folks cool while they were working. Well, how do you power something like that out in the woods? Well, you jerry-rig something like this that then could start a fire. Oil change, how to grow. And another interesting thing for me that I like to think about is these are, advertising themselves as medical marijuana, yet they're using turf and landscape products, in this case a pre-emergent herbicide on the site. So you can kind of see how steep that slope is and what they need to do to get plants to grow.
Was this then, you said medical marijuana, was that a legal, so-called legal site?
At least claiming to be. You never know. You see, when you go to one of these sites, you'll see the cross, you'll see 215 somewhere, you'll see the actual recommendations from the physicians posted, and you see 2 or 3 recommendations for 2 or 3 people, and you see, more plants than anyone could ever use or smoke in many people's lifetimes, I think, and that's what you're up against. But they are at least claiming to be medical. You see notices like the one on the slide right now, and you find, sometimes organic, sometimes not.
Is there a definitive number that you're allowed to grow, number of plants?
Well, that can be regulated by the counties. That's generally what we've seen. And so, for example, Shasta County has an ordinance. It's a land use ordinance, and so it ties the number of plants that can be grown to the acreage of your property. And so, at the most, it's not a whole lot, but there are many other conditions that are tied with that, such as having a legal residence. That's usually not the case, and so you really don't see. I don't believe there's much compliance with those codes, even though they exist. I think there's a lot of non-compliance.
And I think I can add a little bit because I've had cases like this. And what's happening is that, you know, people go to a doctor, and depending on how much money you have for your consult fee, if you have $50, then you're not that sick. And if you have $100, then you must be really sick, and then you get a permit that says that you can grow up to 99 plants or something. And that's illegal because the doctor cannot tell you how many plants you can grow. They can tell you how much medication you need. And so doctors are scamming people and saying, okay, you can grow this many plants. They put the signs on the tree and think that they're protected, and they're not. So the doctor's recommendation can be for use, but cannot tell you how many plants.
Right.
And so anybody that has that kind of information has been defrauded themselves.
Right, and it adds to the kind of regulatory void. Earlier, Patrick talked about, you know, federal versus state. This is another piece of that whole void because on the one hand, I have a right to have 99 plants. On the other hand, the county where I'm growing the plant says I can only have, you know, so many square feet or so many plants. Well, you know, who wins? In the meantime, there's lots of other things going on. So, thank you.
Yeah, I would add that the health and safety code provisions do put a lot of emphasis on county regulation. The counties have been all over the map on this in terms of no plants, and a lot of these, interestingly enough, a lot of these ordinances that the counties have put forth, you see the type of opposition comes pouring in that is extraordinarily well funded, believe it or not. You know, shocking, right? But there's a lot of money involved here, and some counties have put forth ordinances, and they've been opposed with an avalanche of money and well-funded attorneys. I'd also add that in certain counties you have ostensible caregivers that lump together a number of patient permits and then grow plants for a dozen people, which could be legal, but I think I'd echo the comment that if you really looked in depth to these type of operations, very, very, very few of them are in compliance with every single law that's applicable. I would say at the state level and certainly at the federal level, they're non-compliant.
So just some more shots. People will do whatever it takes to get water to the plants, long runs of pipe, all those kinds of things. You know, and where you have human activity in places that really aren't set up for it, you know, things are discharged, litters left, all those things we've already mentioned. So, does it have to be this way? Actually, no, it really doesn't. And so, I'm going to leave you just with a couple other thoughts things I've thought about as I've learned more and more about this. You know, as Dwayne mentioned, cumulative impacts are big. Our acreages that we see in our area tend to be small, but there's so many of them. And you talk to a grower and they say, hey, I just got this tiny little thing. Why are you coming after me? But so does everybody else. And we've seen via aerial images, we've seen whole neighborhoods turn to growing, and, you know, rural neighborhoods, and it's, you know, it's a huge change of land use. It's rapidly expanding. And so one of the things I like to think about is, where is this happening and what does that have to do with the impacts? And so just very quickly, I just want to introduce a concept here. You know, we have arable land. We have some of the best arable land in the world in this region. And that's land that's suitable for agriculture. And some of those characteristics are things like deep soils, you know, flatlands with a low erosion threat. We either have rainfall at the right time, or we have the irrigation water infrastructure available and accounted for. These places are permanent cropping areas. These are high-value lands. The agricultural activities are regulated. The impacts are known. We live with that. We know there are impacts. We accept those impacts because of the benefit of producing food and fiber. I'm going to make the argument that most of where this is happening, this is non-arable land. This is land that's not suitable for agriculture. And if you look at every picture here, there's something in common. This is basically container gardening. These plants are in grow bags, they're in raised beds, they're in some kind of a container with imported soil. So these sites aren't even being used really as agricultural sites. They're just being cleared for sunlight. They're importing the soil. They may or may not be importing the water. And, you know, it's just a surface to grow on. non-arable lands have thin or no soils. They tend to be steeper with a higher erosion threat. We don't have that irrigation water infrastructure. We may not even have a water right. These are short-term operations. They tend to come and go. And my argument is it really makes no sense to grow cannabis in these kinds of places. They're not suitable really for any kind of agriculture. And as already has been mentioned quite a few times this morning, this is largely unregulated and impacts are not fully understood. And if you take a look at a couple things, we can make an argument too that corn and cannabis have a lot of similarities. They're both fast-growing summer annuals. They need lots of water. They grow quickly, accumulate biomass. They're both very useful plants, genetically diverse, multi-purpose. So you can go back and look at some of these cannabis sites and say, are these, would these work for growing corn? Would you grow corn in a bag on top of a mountain? Well, no, you wouldn't. And they're really not suitable for any kind of this type of agriculture, and they're probably not sustainable at all. So what's the solution? Well, we do see, sort of urban grows, backyard grows. Really the environmental impacts are much less. There are social issues and impacts likely with these kinds of operations, but we see those. There are some other solutions out there. We are talking with growers groups. There are publications being produced. This one, even though showing vegetables, it's really aimed at cannabis producers, and talking about best management practices, largely aimed at those operational impacts I mentioned earlier. Not necessarily so much the development impacts, which is the other piece of this, but in terms of making a healthier farming operation, these help. And just to speculate, Senate Bill 566 was passed and signed recently, which then would pave the way maybe for what they call the industrial hemp industry, which would be regulated, and CDFA would have a role, and it would be treated like other crops. And so that's an interesting possibility for the future. In the meantime, I think what I've been trying to do, and many of us at the Department of Fish and Wildlife have been trying to do, is really to help raise awareness. This is a new issue for my area. It's not so new in the Emerald Triangle, but let's keep talking. Let's continue the dialogue. We need to include everyone, growers, all levels of government, patients and recreational users, doctors and the medical industry, environmentalists, hunters, hikers, fishermen, law enforcement. Use the tools we have, enforce existing laws, and together pursue long-term solutions. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brad. At this point in time, questions for both you, members of the board, or for Lieutenant Little?
I have one question. You mentioned that typically a grow site they're there for 1 year and then they move on, then they go wherever they go, Texas or wherever, and then they come back to a new site the next year. They never usually stay at one site for many years.
We see both. A common scenario is put a small down payment on a property at the right time of year, move in, grow, harvest, don't ever make a payment and leave. That's one scenario. Another is that the site is used multiple times and the soils eventually are dumped. So you see a little of everything, but I think the bottom line is that a lot of these sites just are not sustainable locations for agriculture of any kind.
And then my follow-up question would be, what is, and maybe this is where we're going to go next, is what is the cleanup process for those sites that are abandoned? But I think we'll talk about that next.
Yeah, and that answer is a very depressing answer, actually.
Lieutenant Little,
There's not a lot of cleanup.
Lieutenant Little, I believe you wanted to say something.
I was just going to add to that most of the reason that you find the growers moving from site to site is because of our pressure, law enforcement pressure. It's a shell game. We find them in one site. We were able to put a good case against them. Then next year, they find another piece of property. And the real criminals in this whole shell game are the landowners that are leasing or have bogus sales contracts on these individuals who really need to be looked in by the federal government or by the state attorney general's office for what they're doing. They come into these situations. They know it's a quick buck for them. And the real scam of it here is that the growers will spend $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 on improvements, drilling a well, putting in a road, harvesting timber, and it may all appear that, you know, the landowner is removed, and until the proper agencies go after the actual landowner, they are removed. But the grower, he's just made maybe $500,000, if not more, maybe $1 million. The landowner now just had $60,000 worth of improvements done to his property. The county comes down on him and says, you know, we're going to file an NOV on you because you've got this grading, you've got this illegal well. What do I have to do to bring myself into compliance? And a lot of times the counties just want to bring him into compliance. So the landowner comes in, he throws in a little soil and erosion control, and he gets his well permitted, and then he removes an illegal structure. And, you know, the county doesn't have the money to do cleanup and abatement. They rely on the landowner to try to do it at his leisure. And finally, the county, you know, after the NOV's been setting over this landowner for years, you know, the landowner has no intent to sell it or build on it. He's just going to constantly lease it to someone else. And it's just this constant vicious circle where the county's doing the best they can with their resources, the landowner's profiting.
Interesting.
Carl?
Yes, Bob?
First, I want to thank you guys for your efforts. It was interesting as I listened to your presentation how my latent anger bubbled up to the surface over this issue, and that must be really hard to deal with also in your professions. I think just in some preliminary thoughts, and you know, the conservation group I work with, Tuolumne, is in the Intercoast Range, and you know, that's where I've got exposed to a lot of this with some of the operations that the Bureau of Land Management's done, or the Mendocino National Forest, in coordination with local sheriffs and the California Attorney General's office. And a lot of those that we know are just what all of us would classify as illegal grows, and they do like you talked about, where they're stripping the understory, they're diverting stream erosion results. They're using very powerful herbicides, pesticides, and there's lots of trash and human waste everywhere. I mean, you really characterized it well. So we're kind of focused on the Sierra. I'm here too to make sure we understand, as has been pointed out, this is a regional issue and it's a state issue, and we see it throughout this region. We see it, as you said, both in urban areas and rural areas, on both private and public lands. As we move forward, one of the things that I liked some of these strategy discussions is one, you know, there's no judgment about marijuana or cannabis in this discussion. The discussion's on the impacts. I mean, separating and I think working with those that are attempting to do a good job or be compliant with Prop 215 is California legal, from those that are just, you know, both federal and state illegal is going to be a strong tool, because you need good actors, and then you can go after the bad actors. And one of so I think that kind of strategy as we move forward would be helpful. Patrick, you talked a lot about, you know, not being usurping federal law, but you know, the whole California Proposition 215 does that to some extent. And I think as you know, our job is to be part of the enforcement of California law, and as it is. And I think using our irrigated lands program, as we talk about this more, may be a really effective way to go. Working with the Cannabis Coalition that represents the California legal growers is extremely powerful. But these impacts on the land and the rapidity with which this has happened in the last 5 years, this board and other state agencies must address this issue. And like you said, Patrick, it isn't going to go away. And the one other thing is, you showed slides of industrial agriculture and for hemp and the new laws there. And I think, you know, that's just going to be another tool as moving this type of production into agricultural lands, and those lands are appropriate for agriculture. So that's some preliminary thoughts that have come to
I
my
think
mind.
those are very valuable thoughts. And just to follow up, Bob, on your comment about with the irrigated lands framework, as we heard again, and as we well know, as we heard again yesterday, both the grower and the landowner have responsibilities under that, and that's an aspect that address part of this that I find alarming, and that's the bit you were talking about, Lieutenant Little, about the landowner throwing up their hands, but really benefiting from the operation, though they had nothing directly to do with it. So there's a lot of wrinkles to this as we go down the road. Just something that I heard some time ago from an agricultural source was that, in fact, the cannabis growers are not happy with the hemp growers simply because of the fact, I don't know how much truth there is to this, but the bees don't know the difference between cannabis and hemp, and if you have a hemp operation nearby, it greatly decreases the amount of the value of the cannabis. So maybe it's good we have more hemp growing.
I see Joe Krakowski in the audience here, so maybe later we can, in another meeting, we'll explore his thoughts on what is or isn't appropriate with the irrigation lands program.
Thank you.
His plate's pretty full right now, I know. So.
Well, I think, yeah. Sandra?
Is it on? I have a comment, not really, on the impacts on the 99. I've also, I am from Alpa, rural area. And all the areas that I know around me, around us, is Alpa, Allensworth, and Seville the heaviest hit, as far as I know. We had approximately 80 farm in a small rural community of 700. I say 700, 800. I say this school is the biggest number there. But anyway, 4,000 plants was last year was I believe the DA came in. 4,000. We couldn't even believe it. We know this farmer or man had 20 acres. I was looking at the chart, 4,000 plants in the water. Our issue was capacity. I don't know if you all know about Alpine and how we went dry, almost had to have wells, and we're under kind of an enforcement at the capacity of people that we should be giving water. When we first started, I think it was 274. Now we're at 357. With a chemical plant there and a solar system there, it has gone up. It's a story, but yet they wouldn't come in and do much because the laws. The Tulare County had its own laws until our board president at the time, now vice president, went on the media. He went and to Vanderpool. They did everything they could, but it took them a long time to come out and confiscate some of those farms. At this time, I believe we have maybe 40. Right now, they're harvesting. It's going on. But this is good for me to take back to the people that we're community members and let them know, because I really didn't pay attention. He asked me, Sandra, what about the water quality? I said, I haven't heard anything. I mean, I'm going on other issues. But to see all the fertilizer, to see all this right here in front of me, I can take back and tell him, yeah, there is concern now. I mean, there's a great concern because, like you said, if we're looking and having regulations for farmers, for dairies, for the quality of water, it's good to look at what can be done here. At first, I'm going to tell you, I thought, well, the regional board, we don't have any business in looking at this issue, because that's a DAA problem. That should come from somewhere else, but I am real happy to see all this because, I mean, I'm just coming into learning more of the issues for rural communities. These communities have cartel in we don't even know the people. We know the ones that are leasing because they're our neighbors, they're in need or whatever. In fact, we were asked, we have an acre of land, we were asked to get with that. Our land is, we have a house and a shop and the rest is empty. Right there in the main town. The reason that they really did something for Alpa was because one of the neighbors in front of the school put up a little farm, and that was it. That was like, no more. That's what caused them to come in. But it is very instrumental, this information you're giving us.
May I add one thing, please? May I add one thing, real quick? Just to be put in perspective regarding your issue, this is not an affront towards legitimate marijuana use. But what it is it's an affront towards commercialization of, illegal commercialization of marijuana. Anybody that tells you that he's growing marijuana 40, 50, 60, 100 plants for his personal use, if you think about it, you break it down, there's roughly 450 grams in a pound. The average marijuana plant produces at a minimum, or I should say roughly a pound of marijuana. That's 1.2 marijuana cigarettes or joints per year, per day. And so if you have 10 pounds of 12 marijuana, I mean, a person's literally comatose if he's in, and that's just the marijuana bud. That's not the leaf or the shake to make other marijuana products. Just food for thought when you address that issue.
The issue that Sandra addressed so well, we find in many of the disadvantaged communities, it greatly impacts their water systems, and we're trying to put in viable water systems. So that's obviously putting in the water systems is not the role of this board, but certainly it's part of efforts that I'm involved with, and Sandra also outside of the auspices of this board. Go ahead, Sandra.
The doctors that give this permits, I mean, it's for one person. How do they get 40 or 4,000, which is what, 40 permits to one location when we have 80 locations? It's unbelievable.
Thank you very much.
So,
Yes.
go ahead. Well, my question was, so my neighbors know I'm on this board, and they knew this topic was coming up, and they think they have neighbors who are in this business, and so their first question was, who would we call? And so that's my question. And what happens, and maybe this is Chris's discussion, but if that phone call happens, you call someone in the county, you call local law enforcement, and then what happens?
Typically, I mean, if it's in a rural environment, it's going to be the county, obviously, if within the city limits of the city. And we've been thrusted into that role too. So a lot of people are now calling us because the keyword environment is such a trigger point for everybody. So they'll call us, and we're integral in assisting the county and the municipalities with eradication and investigation. But typically, the best place to start is with your sheriff's department. And they'll have a marijuana eradication team or marijuana investigations team that is ample in dealing with the case. Again, it all falls back on what the county ordinance is. And really what happens is they have to prove that the amount of marijuana grown exceeds the recommendation or what the individual says he uses on a daily basis. And that's where the unlawful cultivation or possession for sales charges come into play.
Okay. And what is the season?
Well, normally they start preparing the land early, sometimes February. They'll start growing April this year. For some reason, and we think it's because there was a glut, and they were trying in the season last year, so they tried to extend the season so they would have more marijuana later to sell. So really, they didn't start in our area. They didn't start growing until June, and that may have been a way to try to avoid law enforcement detection. Hey, that place isn't growing this year. Let's leave them alone. And then we find out, well, they are growing, and so the season can be anywhere from April till in Northern California, Central Valley, till October. Right now, we have a kind of a unique rainfall situation, so everybody's panicking, trying to get the bud harvested before the mold sets in. So there's a mad rush to harvest at this point.
And I appreciate the presentation by both persons. And actually, I'd like a copy of the PowerPoint that Brad Henderson that you put up, and that I know was done jointly.
Well, Carmen, in fact, I was going to ask Ken if the board could have copies of the PowerPoints on this. If you could send them out to us.
Electronic or hard copy?
Electronic.
For me
Okay.
too.
And
No
a hard
problem.
copy for Sandra.
All of them, or the ones with the pictures?
In my
all
case,
of them.
all of them. Yeah,
Oh,
all
okay.
of them.
And I guess the other thing that I would say is that, this is a part of the, program that's just getting started. I've got a little bit of background, and they're not for the reasons that you guys might suspect. It's because of my, the work that I've done as an attorney. So since it's just taking off, I'd really like to be involved in, kind of policy stuff going forward. I think that having seen sort of both sides, I could, contribute. And so just keep me in mind, I guess, for staff as things like this go forward. I'm willing to commit some time to this issue.
Thank you, Carmen. Maybe you don't know what you're asking.
Or maybe I do.
Volunteering around here is dangerous. No, but thank you very much, seriously. Very good. I think we're ready for testimony now by Mr. Kerrigan.
Yes, we are. Good morning, board members. I'm Chris Kerrigan, Director of the Office of Enforcement. And boy, after seeing this presentation, and I've been involved in this issue for going on 5 years now, probably more intensely for the last 3 years, I know it's really an overwhelming issue. It's overwhelming for our agencies, for our citizens, and for our boards, really. And big part of the task here is to narrow down the scope of issues to focus on what we can do. What is our part at the water boards and how can we participate in helping solve this problem as it relates to water quality? I've sat in on dozens of meetings with legislators, the governor's office, the county boards of supervisors, many different stakeholders. And in almost every meeting, there's a confusion between enforcement as it relates to law enforcement and as it relates to water quality enforcement. And our role, of course, as Patrick articulated very well, is water quality enforcement. And so there's a big role for law enforcement in solving this problem. In the last meeting I attended with the key legislators who were mentioned earlier, and many of the stakeholders, including CAL FIRE and others, 30 different state, local, and federal agencies were identified as necessary to solve this problem. And it was one of those situations where I thought they weren't overreaching. We really do need the participation of many different agencies to solve this problem. And we need to look at it from a regulatory standpoint and from an enforcement standpoint. So what I'm going to talk about today is what we have done as the water boards and what we can do using the water board's tools under the Water Code and the Clean Water Act to do our part to help solve this problem. So there's a really big differentiation in this. One thing we don't want to get involved with, or my sense is whether this is a legal grow under Prop 215 or whether it's not a legal grow under Prop 215. That's a matter for law enforcement to decide, and it, as you've heard described, and you probably haven't heard many of the nuances to it, it's a really complex and difficult question because it has to do with a patient's relationship with the doctor and the interplay of land use and zoning codes in different jurisdictions. It's very complicated. What we care about is if there's a grow, is it having an impact on water quality or water supply? And that's where we come in and where we can do our part. So we're not really engaged in that question. If someone contends that they're a lawful activity under Prop 215, then they're subject to our regulations. If they don't make that contention, and we pass it off to law enforcement, and it's their issue. Now, we can support law enforcement with important testimony about impacts to water quality and solutions to problems that are caused. And that's our role in those types of cases. When someone does contend that they're 215 legal, and consequently they have a business in our state that we can regulate with water quality regulations and enforcement tools.
I'm sorry, Chris, did I hear you that if they say they're not 215, we would take a step back and turn it over to law enforcement?
Well, if it's an illegal grow, it's going to be a law enforcement issue. So, I mean, we wouldn't come in and say, look, we're going to issue an administrative civil liability to you, or we're going to issue a cease and desist order, because those people have much more dire consequences, or law enforcement has better tools to address people in that situation, because they're just going to run. And so when you and the reason I started with this is there's a real distinct dichotomy between grows on public land, which are per se illegal, and grows that might be taking place on private land, which may or may not be illegal. So when you have a grow on public land and you're talking about these cartel operations that are on Forest Service land or federal property, the water boards have very little to do, or we don't have anything really to offer there. I mean, if you say, well, we're going to fine you for doing that, the people are like gone to Mexico or wherever they're going to go. Or we're going to take away your property. They don't care about that because it's not their property. So as a practical matter, if it's on public land, it's going to be a law enforcement issue, and our role there is a very minor role, which is to provide expertise or support from a technical standpoint about to enhance water quality or water supply and get back the resource that was hurt or lost. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing on private land with Butte County now. So here's kind of the breakdown where I wanted to start, and that is on public lands, the water boards play very much of a support role. We provide expertise on impacts to water quality and supply, expertise on remediation, and of course, grows on public lands are per se illegal, as Patrick pointed out earlier. On private land, we can use the familiar water code tools to, and that sometimes they work well, and other times they don't work so well, and I'll describe some of the situations where they do work well and don't work well. And again, if it's on private land, the party, we have the ability to go in and issue cleanup and abatement orders to the landowner or others and use our regular tools. So, and that's both regulatory tools and enforcement tools. And so there's kind of two different things, and I'm going to focus today just on the regulatory tools. So right now, due primarily to our engagement with the Butte County Board of Supervisors, we are working closely with them on what I'll call, for lack of a better term, a pilot project. And so there, law enforcement identifies sites and secures sites on private land where they want to do an inspection. So they'll go out and find a site, and then they'll let us know. And Clint and I are tag teaming with some people from my staff, some people from his staff to assist them on their inspections, and we'll start doing that in the very near term. Once the sites are secured by law enforcement and the person is making a claim that, this is a legitimate agricultural operation here, we'll go out and do an inspection, and we'll assist Butte County with making them come into compliance with all of their codes and ordinances and with the water code to the extent that's possible. So what we do is we go and we assist them and say, these cuts to the land present a potential impact from sedimentation and erosion. You need to have BMPs in this area, and then the Butte County attorney, the county council, goes to court and seeks injunctive relief from the judge for all the types of violations that you saw chronicled in the previous presentation. So if there are illegal structures or latrines or garbage, all that stuff is ordered to be cleaned up, and the stuff has to be fixed, and the site is buttoned up. So we're going to work with Butte County on that, and they address all the various code violations and other things that come up under their county ordinances, and we provide support and expertise when it comes to water quality. So in Region 1, in the North Coast region, we've gone further than that, and the Water Board has taken something of an active role with the use of some of the statutes that we have at our disposal, such as Water Code Section 13304, and Stormer Filer from the North Coast region is here in the audience, and he has been on the forefront, I guess, of this effort by the North Coast region. So on private lands, for the non-cartel grows, this is an important tool that we can use, 13304. So 13304 allows the board to order a person, any person, to clean up the waste that is discharged or deposited where it probably will be discharged in violation of an order or prohibition, or if it creates a condition of pollution or nuisance. So it's a very broad statute in terms of what can be ordered. So this type of authority is very effective where you have responsible landowners or lessees. As you know, we use it very frequently with respect to industrial sites and other types of sites that we regulate. Also, liability under a cleanup and abatement order is joint and several. So it applies equally to an operator, or in this case, a lessee, or an owner. And I know that frequently the Water Board's approach to cleanup and abatement orders is to go after the operator and put the owner in secondary position. But here in these marijuana grow operations, as you've heard described earlier, it's important to tag the owner because the operators, as you've heard described, are transients. And they move in, they move out. They don't necessarily have ties to the community like the landowner does. And so it will be very important to exercise our cleanup and abatement authority with respect to landowners who have a tie to the community and an interest in the ongoing financial viability of their land. We've had some success in a dozen or more cases in Region 1 with this approach to landowners who want to have a continuing, ongoing Proposition 215 type of operation on their property. So this is something that can be used effectively against owners. The argument that a landowner is not aware of what goes on his property and that trespassers have come onto the land and denuded it or engaged in one of these activities, in some cases it may present some sympathies. I mean, for me, I think as a landowner, you're responsible to know what's going on your property. But sometimes there's big properties and you're not necessarily aware of it. And yet, the difference, or as between the public and the environment and a landowner that doesn't know what's going on his or her property, it's important, I think, to put the obligation to do the cleanup on that landowner and not on the public. And so you may see cases coming before this board where we're asking you to do just that. So be aware that the risk there and who should bear the burden, it's important for the board to exercise its judgment on that, but in the marijuana cultivation context, it's really important, I think, to focus on owners and operators if you can get them, but owners to make them take responsibility for what's going on their lands.
And if I could just jump in, I think that that's a really, really strong point. And we talked about education earlier, and I think that that's fair. I mean, at the county level, if there was like Member Schneider said, you know, there's no judgment as to the crop, and you just say, look, if you have property that you think you want to lease out for these types of cultivations, here are the rules that you're going to have to comply with. Make sure that your tenant does it, because if your tenant doesn't do it, you're on the hook and you could get a lien, or you could lose your property. So that's just a consideration that goes into when the tenant starts the lease negotiations or whatever. And then at that point, you know, if it goes right, which doesn't always go right, if it goes right, then, you know, it's they're handling it internally, because the owner puts pressure on the tenant and say, look, you're really messing up here and you're going to create a liability for me. So I think that education, you know, would probably go a long way there.
With landowners, letting them know that we're going to hold them accountable, I think, is an important part of our outreach to the regulated public.
Yeah, and to butt into as well, I would agree, because there are some very large landowners, some regulated by the state, some just as commercial operations. But if the word gets out, you're going to tell your neighbor, hey, don't, you know, this is what happened to Bob over here, or there's a big liability. And even though, Lieutenant, you talked about how the counties want to sort of solve the problem, if it becomes to the point where it becomes a liability rather than a quick fix, then there'll be less and less looking the other way, I think. And so one of the questions I had was, without mentioning names, these other large landowners, are they participating in these discussions? Are they aware, or
I think there's a fair amount of that on the north coast in what was described earlier as the Green Triangle counties, but it really is an emergent issue in the Central Valley region, in the north part of the state. It has really, I mean, those areas, the Green Triangle areas, they are mature. There are growers there that have been working there for 20 or more years. Here we've seen the vast proliferation of the grows in the last 3 to 5 years, as you heard described. So it's there, the problems that are being faced in the two regions are different. And so far, the governor's office and agency is giving the two regions a lot of leeway to learn from each other and see what kind of regulatory tools and enforcement tools best fit their region. And I think because there are so many emerging issues, it'll be important to learn from Region 1, but then take the tools and adapt them. So I know that's not a very certain answer, but there's not a lot of certainty with respect to this. It really is in many ways a new frontier for regulation. So we also, under 13304, as I think you intimated to Chair Long, we have the ability to put liens on property, or maybe that was Carmen, to put liens on property and do the cleanups ourselves. The problem is, over the long term, that's not a super satisfactory remedy, and it can't be used very broadly because it takes a big pot of money to do it, and we don't really get the money back until the property is sold. And we don't necessarily have priority when the property, with our lien when the property is sold. However, in acute situations where there's a need to really come in and do something quickly, maybe button down a site that's particularly bad before the rains come, we do have that authority under 13304 to come in, do the work ourselves, or contract for the work, and then have a lien placed on the property. And it's a statutory lien that's available to us without going through any judicial process. And that was one thing I forgot to mention. When I was talking about the county, when they go to do these code enforcement actions, they have to go to court, and it's a very complex process, and the evidentiary requirements are very cumbersome. When we do a cleanup and abatement order, we can get it done pretty quickly as compared to a judicial action, and we can take and receive evidence in a very open way and really have more effect with cleanup and abatement orders than the code abatement actions, but they're not as broad. All we can address really is water quality and not all these other things that you're seeing, like maybe electric violations, unpermitted structures, and all that kind of stuff. So it is a tool that we can use. It has its limitations, but it could also be very powerful. Also under 13304, your executive officer is authorized to make direct referrals to the Attorney General's office. Generally, she consults with the board on those, or the board chair. But we can quickly get the AG's office involved in an abatement action and obtain injunctive relief under that statute if we need to. And then finally, we can impose civil liabilities for violations of cleanup and abatement orders, which is somewhat cumbersome and really a second thought. I mean, it's something where in most of the situations that we've addressed in Region 1, the dozen or more cases where we've had cleanup and abatement orders, and we've had some subsequent violations, usually leadership there is focused on getting them to come into compliance with the order and get the site buttoned down and cleaned up. And of course, that's always our first job. But as we move forward and we get more of these on the books, it will be important to be able to follow up with administrative liabilities for violations of those orders. So here's some of the challenges, and I've touched on these to some extent already, but the facts needed for effective enforcement under the water code. We need an owner or operator that claims legality under the Compassionate Use Act. We really need to have that, because without that sort of claim, then we're dealing with someone that's just going to leave the site, and a cleanup order or an administrative civil liability is going to have no effect on that type of person. So to that extent, too, we need a viable business entity or operator with an intent to continue business. And these are more factors than exclusive. The more we have of this, the more likely that our enforcement tools will be effective here as just the water board acting on its own. A viable landowner with a desire to preserve his or her property value. Now that could be in a trespass situation, or it could be in any situation where maybe it's a naive lessor or landowner, but as long as there's a viable landowner with a desire to preserve his or her property value, then our enforcement tools can be effective because we have that lien right with them, and then also their property becomes unsaleable if it's a nuisance. So that's a very high incentive, and it's a situation where our enforcement tools can be effective. And then we also need to be able to enforce effectively, we need to pursue one or more of the regulatory options that Patrick described, because then we'll have an ability to act proactively with enforcement as opposed to having to react to situations that have already developed into a situation where there's a need for a cleanup and abatement order. Now, we can act on the threat of creating a condition of pollution or nuisance under 13304 and issue a cleanup and abatement order. But with these types of people, if we have a regulatory program in effect, we can also bring to bear many of the other tools under the Water Code, like cease and desist orders, time schedule orders, and administrative civil liability complaints.
And I think that you're right with the regulatory program, we can prevent the effects that we're so worried about that are occurring. So instead of going in there and trying to clean up the mess and worry about who's going to pay for it, if we have a real program that people know about, we can prevent a lot of the damage that's the primary concern of the people who've testified here today.
So if you think about putting all the logical assumptions together, if people say, I'm a legitimate medical marijuana producer, then they should be willing and able to comply with water quality regulations. And that's where we have a role. So to me, there are so many things that we could become involved with and so many things we can participate in. And the state board will have our role in statewide development of policy on the law enforcement end of enforcement. But what we can do in this regional board and what we can do now is really help with the enforcement of water quality protection.
We're going to continue this discussion just a moment. I'm going to take a short break. There'll be questions for you, I'm sure. Before we take that break, item 18 will not start before 1 p.m. The board, depending upon when this item finishes, may move on to other items on the agenda, and we should be back here in 5 minutes. Thank you.
So I'm going to get some Tylenol from Sandra here. So. It'll be just a second. Thank you. 500 milligrams. You're my kind of lady. I do.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Sandra.
If you'll continue.
Okay, if there are questions for me, I'm more than happy to respond, and either today or at any time. If you'd like to call my office or contact me, and if not, then I'll reintroduce Clint Snyder, who will finish with the strategic plan that he's been developing.
Well, certainly you are part of the state board structure, and this, I presume, you talked first of all about working in some of the work going on in other regions. I am concerned about this issue to begin with, and we have a lot of it going on in this region. At the same time, as I stated earlier, I want to ensure that we are in step with the other, what is going on throughout the state. So, but I'm sure you have the same concerns in that respect.
That's partly my role, and Tom Howard sent a memo out notifying the executive officers and the staff at the regional boards that I'm taking the lead on behalf of the state board with this, but also the chief counsel's office is coordinating, I know, very closely between the regional board attorneys on this too. Because there are so many legal issues involved, Both our offices are pretty closely engaged in coordinating and then working with your executive staff, Clint in particular here, and David Leland and in Region 1 to, assist with the development of programs that fit with the regional board's, philosophies and programs in the various regions. So, yes.
Thank you very much.
So in the interest of time, we've gone longer than we thought. I'll try to move quickly through this. Is really to reiterate your point, Dr. Longley, in the coordination aspect. And so as we started wading into these waters, we put together a strategic plan outline, and really that was really just a framework of understanding, if you will, between the multiple agencies that are involved as we went forward to meet with the governor's office. And so really that strategic plan touches on a couple key points. One, we have established a local working group to address the immediate needs. There are also goals and objectives of the statewide task force and the water board staff's long-term goals. The strategic plan, as I said, involves a local working group. The participants thus far have been the State Water Board, the Central Valley Water Board, North Coast, Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE, and local law enforcement, primarily Sheriff Smith with Butte County and Sheriff Basinko in Shasta County. We meet, generally speaking, conference calls, and the purpose of those conference calls are really to try to flush out and better organize this effort moving forward. Local working groups' goals are really to try to develop some type of geographical organizational structure. I'll show you a map in a second, but there are 37 counties in which Region 5 touches on approximately 40% of the state's landmass. So a county-by-county approach is simply an ineffective approach from the water board standpoint. That doesn't include taking it statewide, so we've got to come up with another way to do that. Another point here is the joint site inspections with law enforcement. We've discussed the protocol of how that might work. As Chris mentioned, the potential for cleanup and abatement order, development of a template that would include a landowner and potentially a grower. Try to assess civil penalties whenever there are appropriate violations, and then publicize any enforcement as more of an educational effort to deter this type of activity in the future. The strategic plan also includes a list of statewide task force participants. This is just a few of the ones that Chris was mentioning earlier. He said there's a list of 30. I won't go into all of this, but you can see there are many federal, state, and local agencies, officials that would or could potentially be involved. Just for instance, I say county departments, county environmental health, county environmental or air quality, code enforcement, law enforcement, so it balloons very quickly. Our approach in moving forward with the strategic plan is really to try to characterize the problem. Again, talking about Brian Schmidt and trying to quantify the number of growth sites within the state of California. Agency law and regulations assessment. There are overlap between Fish and Wildlife, Water Board, CAL FIRE regulations, even at the state level. And so trying to assess which tools are going to be the most effective given certain scenarios, so that where on site we can quickly make that determination as to who might be the lead agency and the most appropriate to move forward with an enforcement action. The other agencies involved would sort of take a subsidiary role in supporting that prosecution through testimony and what have you. Again, evaluating the resources and funding mechanisms. This isn't going to be cheap. There will be costs associated with this. It's going to require a significant amount of manpower, not only at the staff level, but also with our legal counsel. It is hoped that through the development of management agency agreements, we may be able to better facilitate these processes and ultimately develop a statewide strategy to address cultivation. The Water Board's long-term needs, both Chris and Patrick have touched on this, but potentially looking at some basin plan amendments or prohibitions. that would therein support potential general order or waiver specific to marijuana cultivation, multi-agency resource assessment, and funding mechanisms. Give you just a quick example, one individual on the north coast with DFW actually conducted a resource assessment, and he determined that his office would need 100 additional staff to adequately address the problem over there. So if that's any indication of what the other agencies would need, it's a significant amount of resources. Future activities really is to better organize the working groups by geographic area, using Fish and Water Board and Fish and Wildlife regional boundaries. I'll show you that map again in a second, and you'll understand why. Participate in local inspection groups, participate in a statewide task force, basin planning general order. To catch up here, and then again, a strong assessment with our enforcement tools to try to figure out what is going to be the most effective. Here's that map I was discussing. As you can see, with just the three state agencies, Matt Boone, registered forester, and my staff put this map together. Quickly, the shaded areas are the water board boundaries. The red are CAL FIRE boundaries, and the blue are Fish and Wildlife boundaries. So to say that it's going to be simple to organize this effort is a bit of an understatement. We've got a lot of work to do still, but give you some indication as to what we're looking at. So as far as some last minute thoughts here, and I have had conversations with these individuals ahead of time just so that no one's alarmed here. The Water Board Subcommittee, Ms. Moffett and Mr. Schneider, Mr. Palupa and I would likely initiate this process by conducting an aerial evaluation and inspections with Mr. Little or other law enforcement. The purpose of that as executive management is that, we want to thoroughly evaluate this process before we ask staff to volunteer to conduct these inspections. As Ms. Creedon has made the point many times, safety is now and will always be our number one concern and moving forward with this subject. So I think by us actually conducting the first inspections and being able to evaluate the processes that we have developed through those inspections, we'll be able to feel confident that when we ask staff to conduct these inspections, that they are going to be safe. With that, you can read the bullets real quick. I'm going to button up. I think it's just one last message I want to leave you with. Both Mr. Little, or Lieutenant Little, and Mr. Henderson have come here today. I think what you're really seeing is that this relationship that we're establishing with these other agencies that we'll have to work closely together with. No one agency can do this on their own, rather county or state. It's going to require a multi-agency effort. This is the first time I've seen Mr. Little in this type of a uniform. Usually when he comes to the office, it looks very different. He is a working individual. I receive messages from him 24 hours a day. It is truly around the clock. So I just want to thank both these individuals for being here today. I'm sure there's at least one grower who is thanking your presence here today that they prolonged for one day. So anyway, I just want to make note that I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today.
And we join you in thanking the panel here for their very interesting and I think very informative discussion. The gentleman from Region 1.
Stormer Filer.
You got any last wise words for us?
It's a big problem.
Well said.
2 words, okay. And I take it that you're the staff lead for this in Region 1, is that correct?
I've been working on it since 2007.
And any insights that you can offer to us?
I think cleanup and abatement orders work well for restoration. We go after the landowners over there is what we've been doing. We have a lot of steep ground, so we don't really try to get people into a compliance. We try to get people to restore their property to a condition that's not affecting water quality anymore in the future. No pun intended, but this is a growing problem in our state. It really is. Not just in our region, but also in Region 5. I've seen it growing there as well. I've gotten complaints from CAL FIRE people that say, hey, we need some help over here in the past. And I see that you guys are taking an active role now in that, and I think that's great and commendable. We all have to work together. This isn't going to go away. It's there, and we're going to have to deal with it.
And I want to thank you for coming today, and it's working together that's going to help. Any
So-
questions for anybody on the panel? Or
I have a question for this gentleman. So you said that cleanup and abatement orders seem to work well. What about how successful has that been? So they work well, but in avoiding repeat offenders and all that stuff.
So far, we haven't had any repeat offenders. They generally clean up their properties. Sometimes they delay compliance. Other people also sometimes delay compliance that aren't marijuana growers, though, so I'm not saying that that's specific to their culture or anything. We are also have been successful in getting administrative civil liability penalties following cleanup and abatement orders, and then getting press releases on that, and that seems to make an impression on people. It's a really big problem, and it's really going to take some more people to work on it. So if we can get more staff in any way, that would help. It would be my conclusion about the issue.
So with the press releases, do you ever have landowners that come to you proactively, or I mean, has anything changed where they're approaching you yet?
No.
There is a coalition there that represents the industry. I'll characterize it as industry, I guess, that is working with the regional board staff to try to do outreach to their constituents. And I think that coalition has been affected by the enforcement actions being taken and is trying to act as a liaison between this group of the regulated public and the regulators. One of the problems with the coalition is that part of their philosophy or business plan is to also promote the production of the product. And so that makes it difficult in the sense of our support of an agency like that because of the issues that Patrick touched on. So they are a trade association like WISPA or something like that for the growers. So the idea of environmental compliance is only one component of their outreach, and yet they have a very valuable function. So the relationships and the parties here are very complex.
Well, that's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear, so thanks.
are there any further questions? We need to move along.
I have a question. It was brought up that there is some new state law, and I'm not sure who this question is for, but there's new law that gives some authority to CDFA to take maybe a statewide role. Where I don't know anything about this law that was just signed, and is there the potential for CDFA to take a statewide role in bringing together all these agencies?
I can address the first part. It was Senate Bill 566, and it's available to review on LegInfo. And I don't know a lot about it. I didn't really follow its progress through, through the legislature, but it was signed by the governor. There's a caveat there, I believe, that it would take some form of federal approval for it to actually begin. But Senate Bill 566.
Sandra?
I have a little bit more information on that. I believe Senate Bill 566 coordinates some of CDFA's relationship to this crop generally, but it's primarily directed at industrial hemp, and industrial hemp is that those growing of a similar, I'm probably going to say this wrong, similar species of plant, but that has an exceptionally low psychoactive ingredient component. So, that certainly is something that they're heading into the direction of and regulating that. But of course, we're dealing with slightly different plants here and different cultivation techniques.
Thank you, Sandra.
I have a question on safety. Do you, how do you serve the cleanup abatement order? Do you mail it? Do you serve it?
So we do an inspection of the property first, and then we mail the cleanup and abatement order generally. Sometimes we have to serve them. I've never had to serve one on a marijuana cultivator. They generally pick up their mail.
So you know where to mail it to.
Yeah, we mail it to the landowner, so it may not be the actual cultivator that we're going after, but we do go after the landowner. That's our primary targets.
Okay, thank you.
John, do you have a?
And so on that same note, does North Coast have policies about inspectors when they feel threatened or when they come across something they didn't expect to see?
I've done a lot of these inspections now, and I've never felt threatened yet. I'm mainly the person doing them for our region. We don't have a specific policy, but if I think something's not safe, I'm not going to go there.
And so
Just one last comment to address that. I kind of pushed over this on the presentation just due to timing, but the plan we have in place was to be a coordinated effort. We would meet set day towards the beginning of the month. We would establish what those priority targets would be. Law enforcement, including Fish and Wildlife, would have approximately 2 weeks to do all the research, background checks, scope out the area, that kind of thing, prior to the actual multi-agency inspection. At that inspection, and it's likely that each agency would need their own warrant, law enforcement personnel would go in first. They would secure the scene, and then the other resources scientists would come in to assess the damage and conduct their site inspection, and then we would all leave together to go on to another site. So we're trying to work all of those bugs out, but the key focus is safety. If it's just completely unsafe, it's going to be a law enforcement matter, as Chris Kerrigan alluded to. We're not going to put our staffs in jeopardy.
And so, I know, Carl, you want to wrap up, so I'll just a couple of closing remarks. Is that okay?
Well, we have a interested party.
Oh.
You may want to hold your closing remarks
Sure.
till after that. Thank you very much for your as I said earlier, very interested and informative presentation to the board. And I do have an interested party, Andrew Merkel, who is on the board of directors of the Western Plant Science Association.
Wow, this is interesting to be here today. My name is Andrew Merkel. I represent Western Plant Science Association. We represent growers and patients in Butte County. We have successfully referended several ordinance proposed by the county because times have changed. Prohibition obviously isn't working. So we're having a really good conversation here. I'm a little nervous, excuse me. Pandora's box has been open, and the people are rushing into this state, and you guys are doing a good job. We have government officials in our area that have contacted you, and we appreciate that too. So we developed this ordinance in Butte County to kind of tie in with commercial agriculture, because obviously that's the problem we're having here, is people that are growing for a lot of people in one area and creating watershed issues and ruining hillsides, and we're trying to get the word out that that's not the way to go about it. A lot of these people believe that government leads to trouble. And so we have a conflict here right now that we need to go out and say, hey, let's work together, because you're not going to make it go away. You'll stomp it out here and it'll pop up there. And we need to develop a new system. Obviously, they've passed a Senate bill with hemp here the other day, which is a good start. But what's taking place here is in the foothills. It's hard to reach. A lot of these people are good people. You are going to need law enforcement to help you go in, fish and game. Our county, Butte County, has said, hey, come and do this. Maybe we could make this a test area. Get the word out. and say, like we have on the radio, we're there, we're pounding it every day. We're like, hey, come into compliance. A lot of people, you know, like I said, don't like government. They're not going to like regulation. And those are the people that are going to have to either get, you know, cited or maybe they'll just go away after a period of time. Our Department of Justice has said, hey, we're giving you guys the right to closely regulate what's going on. I know this is like a very tiny step. What we're talking about here has to do with environmental damage. It doesn't have to do with the full scope of medicinal marijuana. There are certain codes that we could apply under health and safety codes, possibly as we look through these codes that are written that are very vague at this moment in time, which will allow it to grow.
Continue.
We could, it has to be a one size fits all. I mean, everybody can't just, you can't just pick and choose, you know, who's gonna be cited and who isn't. We need to do like an amnesty program that allows people to come out and maybe, you know, say, hey, come over here and let's just get the job done and get the word out. Don't scare them. Maybe we even talked about like a booklet that you can get out to people. So you want to grow in the foothills or you want to build in the foothills, because it's not all marijuana, but mostly is. But there are people building their dream homes out there that need some direction from you guys too. So when they're excavating their property and they're getting ready to build a house, they know what the rules and regulations are. Because we've been having problems with that, trying to develop an ordinance in Butte County just for grading. I don't know if you guys had an opportunity to maybe view it. You know how it is working as a panel, as a group, as you guys are. It's very difficult, and it looks like there needs to be some sort of state standard, like I said, for one size fits all. There are also water issues. We have properties in the foothills that have no well water. They have no water, so they're going to spring boxes. Like you have Hay Fork out on South Fork Mountain. I've got spring boxes around my properties in Butte County that people are pillaging. So they're going to need some help to know what's right and wrong too on moving water. I mean, we have a lot of issues. To this date, we're doing the research. We're starting here. So we invite you to Butte County, maybe to make it a test area. Our ordinance is going to be updated here in a few months, and maybe we could tie a couple things in, like maybe permits, because there are going to be people in the public that are mad that we're spending tax dollars on something people are making money on. So they should help to afford for this program. So it's paying for law enforcement, paying for your time, and we can get it in compliance. Thank you.
Mr. Merkel, thank you very much for testifying in front of this board today. Are there any questions?
What was the name of your association?
Western Plant Science Association.
And I have his address here.
He doesn't want government going over there. Be like,
I have,
knock
well,
on his door.
We have the contact information, and thank you very much for appearing. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, sir. With that, John?
Okay, so thank you all for being here today. Clint, I know you worked sort of taking over where you're at, and it's an important issue. And so if you're trying to figure out where the board is coming from on this issue, like Bob, just seeing those pictures gets you pretty upset. Especially when we're looking at single stormwater events, and we're going to have a whole afternoon on a certain creek in a certain event, and then you look at whole streams being diverted and dried up, and hillsides being washed away, and you looked at all those pictures. I wrote down pre-regulations. It's like air quality and waste, and before they lined landfills, and you saw the birds and the bears, and just everything about what California's been going towards this is just the opposite. And so if the question is, should this board actively remain focused on this issue, my answer is yes. Funding is certainly an issue. 100 staff people in that one agency that's got mature fields where they know where they're at is what would our staffing needs be, and how would you pay for that? And big questions. Don't have great answers, but I know we're just sort of putting direction in place as far as health and safety. Obviously, inspector safety is key, and we would never want to jeopardize that. I like the education piece. The more you're educated, both on the if the damage that can be done, so you're not going to sort of look the other way when your neighbor does it, or the education of the financial risks that could potentially come down. I think that's sort of educating both the grower. Thank you for speaking from the association that there's education there, but hunters and hikers and that who you're supposed to call. You could educate pretty much everybody on this issue, and I again, takes money. I'm not sure where that comes from, but the fact that you have tax and timber and waste and water and codes and pesticides, and I mean, you start naming the agencies. There's a lot of firepower there, but as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, what a mess. I mean, because it's half legal, and so when it's half legal, it makes it very hard to find those that are illegal. And as you said, it's complicated, and I forget who said it, that it's not a black and white standard. You have to know. There's a lot of work to figure out whether it's illegal or legal, and so that makes life a lot more difficult. So anyway, my view is that it's certainly something we should propose, and I think, Clint, your last slide is there's trade-offs. So if we have a limited pool, if we don't get more resources, what are we giving up to go after this? And that makes it tough.
Thank you, John. Any other comments, members of the board?
Just wanted to say thank you for this item. I know the process this summer, late summer, has been, since then we've gone from 0 to 100 pretty quickly, and I appreciate staff for their work, and I appreciate both of you guys from the Fish and Wildlife Services for being here, and then also Region 1. I appreciate your input, and I look forward to more participation from staff in the task force and hearing more about this in the future. I know we'll be very involved, so thank you.
And I
Yes.
joined the vice chair in her remarks, but I also want to thank the vice chair and Member Schneider for their participation and the fine work that they've done on this also. Yes, Clint?
Miss Creedon requested that we provide another update in about 6 months, so we plan to do that.
We'll be looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
Yes. Is it on? I just wanted to thank you also because it's a lot of information. But me personally, as a board member, I was concerned about the safety of staff, and what you said, Mr. Snyder, it makes sense. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And with that, we conclude this item. We'll move on to agenda item number 20. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider amendment of the MPDS permit for the Sacramento Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant in Sacramento County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed revisions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? No. Okay. I can only do that with Debbie. Since there is a person present wishing to contest this item, we will proceed with the hearing. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of... Oh, she's not contesting. You what? I'm sorry. Oh, you're okay. We're going to vote on it.
Yeah, she wanted to speak only if necessary.
Only if necessary. Okay, I didn't have her card. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Debbie. I'm sorry. Okay. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No.
There are none. And there's no one present to contest this matter. And of course, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials and the record. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No issues.
No issues. Thank you, David. Hearing is now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to amend the MPDS permit. This is a voice vote.
I would move.
Carmen's moved. Do I have a second? Sandra seconds. All in favor state so by saying aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions? Motion carries. Take us to agenda item number 21. This is
Dr.
the-
Longley?
Yes.
There was also amendment of the TSO, the time schedule order.
Yeah, we should,
Good.
yeah, we should vote on that as well.
And so I'll need a motion on the TSO.
I would also move on the TSO.
And I have moved and seconded. Carmen moved. Sandra seconded. All in favor state so by saying aye. Second say, any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We'll move now to agenda item number 21. This is time and place for a hearing to consider renewal of the MPDS permit and amendment of waste discharge requirements for the city of Lodi Waste Slough Water Pollution Control Plan in San Joaquin County. Is there anyone present, just a second here, is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? I have one card, but the individual has checked no, so we will then go on. This is, since there is no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials in the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No.
Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No issues.
Thank you. The hearing's now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to renew the MPDS permit and amend the waste discharge requirements.
I so move.
Jenny's moved, Bob seconded. All in favor state so by saying aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions? Motion carries. We'll now move to agenda item number 22. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider renewal of the MPDS permit, amendment of an existing time schedule order, and adoption of a new time schedule order for the City of Davis wastewater treatment plant in Yolo County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Since there is no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials in the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
Yes, there are late revisions. And you have a copy, I believe.
Do we?
Just,
okay.
and they're just for clarification.
Certainly.
Of the documents.
Any discussion on late revisions? Thank you. They're being handed out. We got them earlier by email, yes. Thank you.
And I would move to approve with the late revisions.
Does council have any issues?
No issues.
No issues, okay. I will take your motion.
I'll second.
And Carmen has moved and John seconded. And your motions include the existing time schedule order and the new time schedule order.
Yeah, I would move on both.
And the NPDS renewal.
And the MPDS, yes.
I would move on all three.
And I'll second all three.
Great, so that's clarified. So, let me catch up with myself. This is a voice vote. All in favor state so by saying aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions, motion carries. That takes us back to item 18, which will not start. What about 23? Do you think we can do that, Ken?
Yeah, we do have a staff presentation on that. There's no one here contesting it or anything that I'm aware of. So the board could hear the staff presentation, which basically...
How long is the staff presentation?
10 minutes?
Let's do it. It's an important item. This board has interest in the Delta RMP. We were hearing about it yesterday. So we'd like to hear that, and we can go ahead and while you're getting ready, do we have any anything for closed session during lunch today?
We do not that I'm aware of.
Yes, we do. We will.
So we'll make announcement on that after this, but still, I think we can do 45 minutes, 50 minutes for lunch.
Nothing from me, anyway.
They are so long when they come from you, David.
So good morning, Chairman Longley and members of the board. My name's Megan Sullivan, and I work in the basin planning conglomerate section here at the Regional Board and Sacramento office. And I'm here today to present a resolution regarding discharger participation in the Delta Regional Monitoring Program in lieu of individual monitoring efforts. So I presented an overview of the development of the Regional Monitoring Program earlier this year, so I'll just provide a brief status update about where we've gone since then before I get into talking about the purpose of the resolution, a few key aspects, and then what the next steps are. So the status update since my last presentation to the board, but before I get into the specific activities, I just want to provide a brief reminder about why we're developing an RMP. There's a need to more regularly and regionally assess and coordinate ongoing contaminants monitoring ongoing throughout the Delta by various agencies, both within and outside of our agency. This need is reiterated by the Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Plan, which recommends implementation of a regional monitoring program. And as a result, we're developing a program that has the mission to inform decisions on how to protect and, where necessary, restore beneficial uses of water in the Delta by producing objective and cost-effective scientific information critical to understanding regional water quality conditions and trends. Since my last overview, the steering committee has continued to meet monthly. They've adopted a set of guiding principles which not only include the mission statement and goals and objectives, but also include roles and responsibilities of committee members, as well as several methods of operation for the group. We've also developed a set of management questions, which includes 4 different categories: status and trends, sources and loadings, forecasting, and effectiveness tracking. And these categories also tend to track with some of the information needs and performance measure outcomes that are in the Delta Plan. The steering committee has also elected 2 co-chairs for a technical committee that will be responsible for developing and leading a team of experts to develop the actual monitoring framework. Just last week, the steering committee, was it last week? September 23rd, time flies when you're working on the RMP. But the steering committee discussed 5 information papers about key constituents of interest: mercury, nutrients, pathogens, pesticides, and toxicity. And the purpose of the papers is to provide common background information for the steering committee members to start selecting an initial focus priority for the program. In addition to this priority focus, the program will also include several ancillary water quality parameters, as well as various constituents required as part of regional background characterization. In a parallel process, we've also been looking at the monitoring data that's collected by our dischargers in order to determine the best ways to modify the monitoring to increase efficiencies and to improve regional knowledge, while still ensuring that the appropriate ambient information is collected in order to support the development of new and revised permits. The discussion of priorities has naturally circled back to questions of funding the program, and in many ways that's what leads us to the resolution today. The resolution was proposed and prepared by a small subset of Delta RMP participants for a variety of reasons. It's anticipated that long-term funding and in-kind services will come from many sources, including but not limited to the dischargers, agencies managing or modifying the Delta, groups that make beneficial uses of the Delta waters and habitat, as well as swamp. Regional board staff intends to work with the Delta RMP Steering Committee to secure multiple sources of funding to sustain a viable long-term program. However, the initial funding will come from a redirection of the current expenditures from dischargers who currently monitor receiving waters in the Delta. The funds used to presently monitor surface waters will be used to develop and implement a more spatially and temporally sound coordinated monitoring and study program. In order to implement the program in a timely manner, the various agencies will need to start evaluating their funding and in-kind services that can potentially be provided to support the RMP now. So the purpose of the resolution is to provide assurances to the dischargers that the board will consider the modifications to existing permits in order to allow participation in the Delta RMP in lieu of their individual monitoring efforts. The commitment would provide the dischargers the motivation to begin reevaluating the direction of funds and start providing resources sooner to support the technical work of the coordinated program. So I'm now going to emphasize a few key aspects of the resolution. The overall intent of the resolution is to reiterate that initial costs for the dischargers will be cost neutral, that multiple funding sources in addition to the dischargers will be sought, and that participation will require some flexibility with our current permits and requirements. And it resolves that participation in the RMP is in lieu of current individual receiving water monitoring efforts, that participation will consist of providing funds and or in-kind services that are at least equivalent to the current monitoring efforts, and that adequate participation as determined by the Delta RMP Steering Committee must be maintained and required. So the development of the RMP requires several ongoing parallel processes, and this resolution is the first step in a process related more specifically to the participation of regulated dischargers. The next step in this process will require the development of the specific language for the permits in order to allow for participation in the RMP in lieu of individual receiving water monitoring efforts. Regional board staff will be working in coordination with the technical team to include background characterization of priority pollutants in the monitoring plan in order to be able to remove existing permit requirements for receiving waters and substitute them with regional monitoring. Regional board staff will then need to revise the permits accordingly and come to the board for adoption of the amended permits at a public hearing. The broader programmatic development also requires numerous sequential steps, some of which are in concert with the discharger-specific work I've just mentioned. As I mentioned, the steering committee met recently and began the process of narrowing the priorities of the initial monitoring program. That discussion will continue next Thursday, October 10th, and hopefully conclude to select a priority to start building a framework around. A technical committee will then be convened to develop a scientifically sound monitoring plan which supports the management questions and is based upon the steering committee's priority assessment questions. The steering committee then has a very difficult task of determining how to fund that monitoring plan. By identifying the best way to pay for the monitoring design through a realignment of our existing monitoring from permitted dischargers and also through coordination of monitoring through other agency monitoring programs and other potential sources. All of the steps we're taking are informed by knowledge of what has been done before to develop other regional monitoring programs. And in fact, next Thursday, we also have a sort of lessons learned panel discussion with representatives from Southern California's BITE program as well as the San Francisco Regional Monitoring Program to discuss, some of the concerns that some of our stakeholders have. And the discussion will help set the stage for many of the big decisions that are continuing to come up for our steering committee as we continue to develop this program. So the resolution is an important step to helping move this process forward and develop the funding sources and ensure we have a sustainable program. So with that, staff recommends that the adoption of the resolution regarding participation in the Delta Regional Monitoring Program in lieu of individual monitoring efforts, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. You speak to an issue which this board confronts continuously, that is not enough resources and great needs. And the Delta is central to California water, so it's just sort of those needs are sort of magnified when we talk about the Delta. This issue has been recognized as something which exists throughout California. To that extent, the California Water Plan 2013 update will have, hopefully, I've authored some language for it that will address this particular issue of the need to consolidate resources, to work cooperatively, to find ways to get more done with less. And I think your presentation points to a proposal in front of this board, which I think is very important. Are there any board member questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
With that said, I don't have any cards for staff comments. Yeah, it's going to be a voice vote, and we have a resolution in front of us, and the resolution, of course, is in volume number 3. It was given to us.
I'd move the resolution.
You move the resolution. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Bob moved, John seconded. Before we vote, there are 6 items to this, after therefore it being resolved, and they all focus on the kinds of issues that Megan spoke about. So with that said, I thank you for moving it and seconding it. We're ready to call the vote. All in favor, state so by saying aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? It passed unanimously. Thank you very much for your presentation. The board will be in closed session until at least 1 o'clock, and Patrick has an announcement to make. Before he makes his announcement, I would appreciate you looking over those minutes, because first item of business that comes back will be approving the minutes with your consent. Go ahead, Patrick.
Absolutely. The board will be meeting in closed session to discuss pending litigation involved in the dairy waste, general waste discharge requirements litigation filed by the Asociación de Gente Unida por el Agua against the Central Valley Water Board. The current status of the case is in the Sacramento County Superior Court.
Thank you, and we are now recessed for lunch.